I've been working as a food delivery driver for about 8 months now, and with how my contract works, I need at least 3 evening shifts, with 2 of those being between Friday and Sunday. I don't really mind working in the evenings since it has a nice vibe to it, being really calm, just throw on some headphones and a good playlist or a podcast and, well, you're good. Plus, I never really work for more than like 4.5 hours on end since I work on an e-bike, so I don't do longer shifts without my battery dying, keeping in mind the bike needs to be taken home as well. Apart from some stupid encounters that I've had with teenagers trying to be funny in front of their friends, like barking after me and asking for food or pretending to be the customer, I've never really had anything creepy happen to me. It was, until a few weeks ago. So, it was a Thursday evening and I had a shift from 5:30 till 9:30. Where I live, us delivery drivers get paid per hour instead of per delivery. This does have its advantages and disadvantages. One of the disadvantages being that we can't decline orders on our own end. If we, for whatever reason, cannot take an order, we need to talk with the company that we work for. So whatever trip is thrown at us, we pretty much have to take it. Up until this point, I've been having a good day, close by deliveries from nice local restaurants. None of the journeys were too far away places, which was good. The weather was fine as well, although a little bit chilly, but if you layer yourself well enough, then it's not as bad as long as it doesn't rain, I suppose, which luckily it wasn't. It was around 8:15 when I got a McDonald's order. The customer lived around 12 minutes away from the restaurant, which wasn't ideal, but it was fine since I'd only lost 1 strap of battery so far. The location it was going to was also a good one, since the only time that I need to get off the bike lane was to cross some roads. Other than that, it was all bike lanes pretty much the whole way. So I picked up the order after waiting for around 15 minutes. I got onto my bike, chose a playlist, and made my way over to this customer. The streets were pretty quiet, setting the vibe. As I got closer to the customer's house, I made my way onto the sidewalk and cycled slowly, trying to find the house number, which can be a bit of a pain at night. I eventually did though, and I locked my bike up. I walked over to the door and knocked. After a few seconds, I heard commotion and I placed my bag down, taking out the food. The door opened and a lady greeted me with a smile. After handing her the food and telling her to enjoy, she thanked me, and after giving me a tip, she closed the door back up and I got back onto my bike and unlocked it. I had been charging my phone with my power bank, but wanted to take the charger off since my phone was now full enough. And dealing with a wire sticking out of my jacket pocket can be a bit of a hassle when taking off and putting back on my backpack. However, I always feel a bit awkward and watched staying in the front yard of people for too long, especially when they have those doorbell cameras, so I made my way over to a small alleyway close to the house. As I turned back off my bike, I took my power bank to turn it off, and then I changed my playlist, and as I was putting the power bank back into my pocket, I heard slow footsteps creeping closer to me from behind. Now, this alleyway that I was standing in was pretty narrow and small, so I was probably blocking it. I quickly moved and got off my bike, holding it close to me as I pressed myself onto the wall. I excused myself and made a gesture for the person to pass, but instead of thanking me and walking on, the person just sort of kept standing there. This is when I looked up. I was met with a tall, skinny lady standing just a few inches away now. Her face was slim and her long hair came to rest on her shoulders. Her face looked white and, honestly, she looked like a heroin addict or something. She looked me dead in the eyes without any expression and was breathing through her mouth. She was wearing brown jeans and a blue hoodie with the hoodie on. Can I help you?" I asked after painful moments of silence. She looked at me for a few seconds and said, "You have my food." I froze. Now, in our app system, there is no way to actually confirm that the customer was the right one since we don't have any security codes to ask. Since I was busy with my power bank, I hadn't clicked finished order yet. I checked my phone and decided to ask the lady questions about the order. I think another driver might have your food. I just delivered to somebody else," I said with a smile. "Where did you order from?" If she was right, I would have been able to easily help her get a refund. However, she just sort of stared at me, her expressionless face turning into a hard, ugly glare. "No," she said loudly, "that was my food," she stated. Again, I tried to reason with her, asking her for her name and what food she had ordered. "I'm just trying to help you, ma'am. Check your app. The app should tell you how far the driver is." To this, she stepped back and pointed her hand at me. "My food. I need my food." At this point, I figured that she must be homeless and hungry or something. "I have some food if you want it," I said. Now, I always keep snacks on me in case I have to wait long for an order to get ready or have no orders to come in for a bit. We do wait a lot since we cannot turn down orders for taking too long to be made. My go-to work snacks are protein granola bars. They're easy to keep since they don't take up much space and you can eat them fast. I decided to give her a box and maybe she would be satisfied. I took one out of my backpack and I handed it to her. She took it from me, damn near snatching it out of my grip, and stepped closer. "I want my food," she stated sternly, her glare sharp. I had let out a breath, getting really creeped out now, and once again asked her to check her app or give me her name, the name that she put up with her so-called order. She took a big breath, and before I could say anything, she exhaled and screamed bloody murder, making me flinch and press myself onto the wall. In the process, I accidentally moved my bike's throttle. This thing alone doesn't get past around 4 kilometers per hour. I had some struggle, but eventually got on the bike and pedaled away, and the lady still screaming behind me. I got to a fence that prevented cars from coming in and had to slow down a bit. And this was enough time for the lady to catch up and even grab onto the back of my bike. I let out a yelp as I could feel her try to push me back. I also heard something scrape the wall next to me. I didn't want to look and instead put my bike into a higher assist mode, which I normally never do and always keep on 2 to 3 to spare battery life, pedaling like my life depended on it as I got past the fences. I then put it even higher and finally I cycled away. I could hear the lady yelling and calling me a food thief and all this, and as I glanced back, she held the box of granola bars above her head and threw them at me. They landed about a meter away from me. I also noticed what was causing that scraping noise, as she was holding a knife in her hand. I focused back on the road and cycled away, hearing the lady still screaming, yelling, and trying to run after me. Eventually, I went back to the app and finally was able to click finish order, hoping to get a new one since I didn't want to aimlessly cycle around in fear of running into her since I thought that she might know all the shortcuts. I got a new order from a kebab place nearby, around 8 minutes away. This place was one that I got sent to a lot, and the owner was very friendly, always asking us drivers if we wanted something to eat or to drink and saying that it was on the house. I got there and was slightly out of breath, and he asked me instantly what had happened and gave me some water to drink and helped me calm down a bit, and then gave me some food. After I told him, he talked to the company, saying that I was in no state to keep doing deliveries that night. My work agreed to allow me to end my shift earlier than normal. One of my co-workers came for the pickup, and since this delivery was just outside of city center, I biked back with him to the city center where it was still busy, and just went on home after that. I'm very glad for the timing of that order, to be honest, my co-worker and for the owner of the kebab store, and I really don't like to think about what that lady would have done if she had successfully pulled me off of my bike that night. This happened only last night, so it is still very fresh in my mind. I've been a caretaker in Scotland of a ridiculously large church, sanctuary, and 3 townhouses for the past 4 years. My job is to look after the various offices and function rooms of the 3 townhouses, manse and church. These buildings, they're 4 stories high and built in 1710. I also look after the church and the sanctuary that are attached to the townhouses. It's a very large building attached to the other large buildings, and overall it's pretty overwhelming. Anyway, I start my evenings in there at around 6:30. I often don't switch on all the lights and have never felt threatened or creeped out carrying out my duties. Last night, however, I felt like an intense feeling of impending doom. I don't know how to describe it better than that, but I told myself that I was being ridiculous and tried to push the feeling to the back of my mind. At about 8 o'clock, I was in one of the charity creches, which is actually a really nice part of the building. Not spooky at all, and I suddenly heard a man say my name. I looked around, but I was the only one there, so I dismissed it. Later, I was walking through the bridge between the townhouses and the church and heard footsteps behind me. I looked and saw no one, but the hair stuck up on the back of my neck again, and I tried to dismiss it, a little more difficult this time. Walking out of the bridge and into the outer sanctuary, I looked into the glass partition to the inner sanctuary, and I swear to you that I saw someone. I got a fright and I went in to see who it was, but again, no one. Then I heard a door slam up in the upper gallery. We have a choir room off the upper gallery, so I headed on up, saw no one, and tried to open the choir room and found it to be locked. I've never known it to be locked. I opened it with the master key and saw nothing except a few chairs and books, but smelled a really bad smell, like bad breath or something. I quickly closed it up and locked it again. At this point, I was more than uneasy. My last port of call at 10:30 was the crypt. I headed down the spiral stair into the crypt, which runs the entire underbuild of the property, and also slightly under the main road outside. Hard to explain, but I cleaned up, and as I was moving down the corridor, I heard footsteps again. I looked around. No one. There's only one entrance and exit in the crypt, so I was certain that I was alone. I quickly put my stuff away, did my final security sweep of the building, and locked up for the night. I had never felt so relieved to get out of that building before, though. I normally love my job there, but quite honestly, I'm a bit apprehensive of having to go to work tonight. When I was little, my mum would always tell me that there are ghosts that stay near the windows, waiting for a child to come closer so that they could push the child off. I did believe it for a while. I mean, I was just a kid. But later I thought that it was just a way for my mum to keep me from going near the open windows. I mean, it made sense. Open windows were obviously dangerous for a little kid. Now, when I was around 7, we lived in this house which had another house in front of mine. The houses weren't separated by a street, but by a small little field, concrete, not grass. The family in front also had a daughter, around 2 to 3 years younger than I was. However, we never really interacted with each other, nor did I know her. Mind you, this was during the time when I had come to the conclusion that my mum's windows ghosts were not real. I was sitting by the window looking outside when I saw the little girl sitting by the window as well. She had noticed me as she was looking down. Apparently, she was waiting for her dad to come home from work. There was no one around her, and as I was looking, I suddenly noticed something move behind her. It wasn't very visible as the lights weren't on, but that was quite normal considering that it was around 4 p.m. and the sun was still out. But this is when I noticed that there was a shadow behind her, a man specifically. I barely had any time to register what I had actually seen before the girl literally falls out of the window onto this little space right below her building. It was covered by another wall, so I couldn't see what had happened. The girl was eventually rushed to the hospital though. She had only broken one of her legs and her nose, and if I remember correctly, her face had been a little bit mangled due to the height that she fell from, but all in all, she was okay and she survived. But let me tell you that seeing that shadow figure scared me so much that I stopped altogether going near any window if it was open. I don't know what happened to the girl later or where she is now, but I will never forget the shadow that was behind her that day, and how she fell straight out of that window upon seeing it. This happened a few years ago, and I've never told anyone about it. At the time, I lived pretty far out in the country, just me and my dog, no close neighbors, and it was usually really quiet. I liked it that way. One night, though, I woke up in the middle of the night to the motion sensor light going off outside. At first, I thought that it was just an animal, maybe a deer or something. But when I looked out of the window, I saw a man standing at the end of my driveway. He wasn't moving, just standing there facing my house. I don't know why, but I sort of froze. I just stood there staring at him and didn't move at all. The light went off after a while and everything went back to dark and quiet. I didn't sleep much after that though, and the next night it happened again. The lights came on and there he was. Same spot, same stillness, just standing there staring at the house. By this point, I was starting to get really freaked out, so I called the sheriff's department and they sent someone out to check it out, but by the time that they got there, he was already gone. The deputy told me that it was probably just some drunk guy or someone passing through and that I shouldn't worry unless he started coming closer. That didn't make me feel any better though, but I tried to move on. This went on for about a week though. Every night, like clockwork, I'd wake up and see him standing there at the end of the driveway. It was always the same too. He never moved, never said anything, just stood there staring at my house. It got to the point where I started closing the blinds at night, but I still felt like I could feel him out there. And then, just like that, so randomly, it stopped. I never saw him again after that week. No explanation, no reason, it just ended. I've never told anyone this before, but it's probably not a big deal. It's just something that stuck with me, and I just thought that I should share it because it is a little bit creepy, right? This happened to me when I was around 13 or 14, so about 14 years ago. We had moved into this house when I was about 6 and I never liked it. I just could never settle in it. I would actually for months when we first moved in, put myself to sleep by repeating there's no such thing as monsters. 2 years later, my little brother was born, and when he was around 3 to 4, he moved into my old room and I got the bigger room. He would always wake up screaming, saying that there was a man in the corner of his room trying to light it on fire. We could only ever get him to settle back to sleep if we put on Fireman Sam, the kids' show. Even when he slept in my mum's room, we'd have these episodes of waking up saying someone's in the corner and there's bugs crawling all over the ground. Really creepy stuff, but we thought maybe a bit of a night terror thing or imagination. Anyway, fast forward another 5 or 6 years, I was having breakfast and my mum tells me that she had such a strange experience the night before and that she was so scared that she was going to come and sleep with me. She said that she was asleep but woke up to the sound of someone breathing in her ear. Now, in her sleepy haze for a few seconds, she thought that it was my brother, but then remembered that he was at his dad's. She jumped up and turned the light on, but nobody was there. So I went to school and came home to her burning sage in her room and her room only. I was like, wouldn't you sage the whole house, yeah? But she only had a little bit left and was going to get some more tomorrow. I didn't think much of it and didn't really believe her story either, to be honest. Until the next morning when I was off sick from school, tonsillitis, and Mum had gone to work. I was happily sitting in my bed playing some Sims when I felt it. Almost a bubble feeling around my head, kind of, like when you're underwater maybe. And then I heard it, this really breathy breathing in my right ear. The one that, if someone was standing beside me, that'd be the ear that they would be breathing in. Now, it wasn't a scary breathing, it was just big, deep breaths, and while I didn't feel threatened, safe to say that I legged it downstairs and I didn't go back up. I rang my mum and told her and stayed downstairs all day until she came home. The woman, though, she forgot the sage. At the time, I thought that was honestly a huge mistake, and I was like, sure, I'll just get murdered. Thanks, Mum. Anyway, I went to bed and nothing happened, but the next morning, same setup. I was happily playing Sims, and it happened again. I remember that I just put my hands up and said, okay, I'm going downstairs. But this time I made sure to take my laptop with me to continue playing The Sims, of course. My mum came home that day with Sage and did the whole house. And after that, it didn't happen again, but a few weeks later, my nan bought me a special heat-resistant mug for drinking green tea from. That was our thing at the time. And my mum and me were standing in the kitchen, talking and just making some tea. And I said as I was pouring the water into my new cup to make the tea, "Hey, I think the ghosts are gone." And when I say that I hadn't even put more than a drop of water in, it was barely a splash and the whole glass just shattered suddenly into a million tiny pieces. My mum and me just sort of looked at each other and laughed and said, "Well, I guess not then." But yeah, that's my story, and nothing else ever happened after that, thankfully. We moved a couple of years later, and then my lovely mum then one day told me, "Oh yeah, when I was younger that house was boarded up and a group of us broke in and did a Ouija board and things started moving around the place, so we ran and we never went back in it again." Good one, Mum, for opening a portal to the spirit world and having us all move in 15 years later, right? So yeah, that's my only paranormal experience, and honestly, hopefully, the last one that I'll ever have. So, I know that this is going to sound a bit weird, but I think that I saw an alien once during the 88 to 89 school year, 3rd grade for me, actually in my school. I had never seen any depictions of greys at that point. I was at school for an after-school art class in the cafeteria at Julius Marx Elementary School and left the cafeteria to go to the bathroom at some point. I turned a corner to go to the bathroom and felt like someone was watching me, so I turned and looked. And standing in the doorway of the class next door to mine, silhouetted against the light, was someone not human-shaped. They were no more than 4 feet tall, very skinny, with a disproportionately large egg-shaped head, and they had long, thin arms and legs for their size, like a child but not proportioned like a human. Now, I was a brave kid then, especially when I was on my own and didn't have to look out for somebody else. I didn't scare easy, but the whole thing just felt so wrong, so, for a lack of a better term, alien, that I was terrified. I dashed into the bathroom. I must have used the facilities because I was never one to wet myself and I didn't need to go anymore. The weird thing, though, is that I don't remember anything about when I was in that bathroom. I don't know how I got back to the cafeteria. I cannot remember, although I remember being very afraid and peeking out and there was nothing there. I must have run back to the cafeteria, though, and told everyone what I had just experienced. That's when I learned about aliens and what they were supposed to look like. One of the other kids drew a picture, and quite honestly, I'm kind of freaked out that I can remember everything clearly, all this detail, except what happened in between running for the bathroom and running through the cafeteria door. other than a quick glance to see if it was there, obviously. I didn't get the impression that I was gone very long, like not even as long as I must have been gone, at least a full 10 minutes, I suppose. On the few occasions I have shared this story over the years, I've only ever gotten one of two reactions: total disbelief, and the assurance that I was just imagining something that I'd seen on TV or read about, or total belief and the assurance that I was abducted that day, and they must have erased my memory of it. All I can say is that I know for sure that I had never been exposed to any images of greys until that day after my experience. Until that moment, I thought of aliens as being fairly cartoonish in their appearance, and green. Remember that I was only 8 at the time, and it was the 1980s, right before the image of greys became commonplace in US culture. Also, although I cannot remember a lot now, I'm fairly certain that I could remember more until the past 10 years or so, because I had a good sense of how much time had passed, for one. And well, that's enough for me to be fairly certain that I'm not missing time and never was in regards to this incident. Also, I have never had another encounter, have never had any further signs of possible abduction, and have never even seen a UFO. Anyway, that's my once-in-a-lifetime weird alien encounter story. I do have some other stories of other paranormal experiences, and it's why I always try to be skeptical. Maybe I'll share some of those another time, but in any case, have a great evening, everyone, and stay safe. When I was young, I saw something really strange. So I was running late for high school and took a path that I had taken hundreds of times. It's just a street that ends on the side of a park that is surrounded by a wall. It's like a big T-top part being the wall, and you can either turn left or right. Now, walking just ahead of me, there was a man with short hair and a backpack. Instead of turning left or right, he just sort of walked towards the wall. The wall's about 7 feet tall on the side of the road, but just about 2 feet tall on the other side, so you can easily see from the roadside people walking into the park, the benches, etc. But the weirdest thing is that this guy didn't walk through the wall. It looked like he was still walking, like one of those things you see in video games where a character is sort of stuck against a wall and starts walking just a few feet above the ground. But then, he just completely vanished. Obviously, I was shocked. I ran towards the wall and looked around, but there was no trace of him. I wasn't high enough to look clearly into the park, so I just assumed that I must have been tired and he just climbed the wall weirdly or something. Well, a few years later, I was in the area again, and I noticed the same guy walking just in front of me. Different outfit, but same bag, same haircut, and I don't know, I just knew that it was him, so I followed him to that same place, and the same thing happened again. I nearly lost it at this stage. It took me a few seconds to compose myself, and I ran to the wall. I was not able to jump to the other side, but I was able to grab the edge and take a bit of a look, and he was not there, anywhere. And there was really nowhere to hide or anything, just grass and some thin trees and a bench. The thing about the guy is that both times I saw him, I noticed that he knew where he was going, so I ran towards the park entrance that was maybe about 40 yards away and went into the same direction, trying to intercept him. On the other side, there was this big plaza, again nowhere to hide, and strangely at that hour it was nearly empty. There was no trace of him, not by the road, not at the end of the street. I mean, he was wearing a very particular outfit, very easy to spot, but he was just gone. For years, I haven't been able to sleep well, because whenever I start closing my eyes, I see just for a few moments many stretched out black humanoid shadows all around my room. Then I wake up and this keeps happening over and over until I finally pass out and sleep for a couple of hours. It always comes with a sensation in my chest or inside of me that's hard to explain, like a mix between pain and a sort of wish sound or a force inside of my body, warning me that this is about to happen and that I need to stay awake, even if I haven't slept before, if I don't want to suffer the consequences, that is. Whenever I try to ignore this feeling, stronger and worse things happen too. I've crossed that line 3 times and they were so intense that I don't ever want to experience it again. That's why I almost never sleep now. I started sleeping facing the wall, fully covered up to my head so that I couldn't see anything, and that worked for a while. Until one night, I felt a large hand with long nails, very cold, slowly touching me from the top of my head down to my back, and then it disappeared. I was horrified, counted to 3, jumped up, turned on all the lights, checked the whole room, and there was nothing. A strange thing, though, is that I sleep on just a mattress, so there's really nowhere under the bed for anyone to hide, which means that I don't really know where that hand came from. The second time I was lying on my back with my arms crossed, and for just a millisecond as I woke up, I saw a black humanoid figure squatting on my chest, staring directly at me. It didn't have eyes, but I knew that it was looking at me because its whole body was bent forward toward me. And the third time just happened this morning. Again, I was lying on my back. I try to sleep on my side so that this doesn't happen, but somehow I always end up turning onto my back while I sleep. I felt a weight on my bed like somebody sat down, and then my blanket was slowly pulled off of my face, gently, as if somebody was uncovering me in a kind and careful way. Then I felt a kiss on my cheek near my neck. At first, I thought it was my mother. I mean, she used to wake me up like that when I was a kid. But suddenly, that kiss turned into like a suction, like a hickey, so strong that I immediately stopped thinking that it was her. It hurt so much that I had to count to 3 to force myself up, even though my body was still half asleep. I stayed alert, looking around. Then I heard my mum on the rooftop, and I realized that it hadn't been her at all. All of this happened because I ignored the warning feeling in my chest that I mentioned earlier, the one that tells me that you have to stop sleeping now, like a sign that if I don't, things like this will happen. I looked online and the closest thing that I could find was exploding head syndrome, but that doesn't explain the other stuff that happens to me. Like one time I searched tutorials on how to fall asleep. There was a military method about holding your breath and relaxing to sleep in 5 minutes. I tried it in the dark with my eyes closed, and I felt a very loud noise aimed at me, as if it entered my body, along with a white light that I could see even with my eyes closed. It made me open my eyes immediately, and I let out a loud gasp, and I turned the lights on and couldn't sleep again. So I have no way to fall asleep, and every time that I feel that warning, I have to just get up, even if I've only slept for like an hour. I don't know if anyone feels what I feel, but an important detail is that if I sleep with someone else in the same room, not necessarily the same bed, but none of this ever happens, and I can sleep as long as I want. And right now I feel like I only have 3 choices. Don't sleep, and this is normally what I do, until I just pass out really. Ignore the warning and seeing how far I can go, even if this stuff happens. I am scared though that it could be too strong and I won't be able to handle it. I don't know where the limit is, to be honest. Or sleeping accompanied. I don't want to do this because I don't want to bother my family, but honestly I'm really not sure what to do anymore. Has anyone else ever felt something like this? Do you have any advice on how I can sleep or what this could be that would help a lot? I just really want to feel safe sleeping again. This happened to me when I was really young, somewhere between 3 and 5 years old. I'm not really sure. Back then, 2008 to 2013, my family used to sleep on the floor in the bedroom on the second floor. We couldn't afford proper beds at the time, and it was usually just me, my mother, and my newborn sister in one room. And before my dad passed away, he would usually sleep on the couch in the living room since we didn't have an AC unit back then. We would just leave the doors wide open for the cold air. On this particular night, I randomly woke up out of nowhere. I don't know why, but I just sat up and kind of looked around. Everything was quiet, and it must have been at around 1 or 2 in the morning. The orange glow from our nightlight made everything feel strange and a bit eerie. Then I heard what sounded like slow, faint footsteps or tapping. For some reason, I decided to crawl toward the sound. Maybe I was too young to walk around at night, but I clearly remember crawling on all fours. I stopped in the middle of the hallway and looked around the living room because I thought that's where the sound was coming from. I saw my father on the couch, maybe asleep. Maybe not, I'm not sure, but the room was dim, but I could still make him out. Then I heard the sound again, but now the sound was coming from the sewing room. I turned toward it and crawled all the way up to the doorway, and there was no door back then, just an empty frame, but the second that I reached it, the sound stopped. At that moment, something suddenly felt very wrong. Unlike the hallway or the living room, the sewing room wasn't just dark. It was pitch black, like an empty void. What I mean is that it wasn't just the kind of darkness that you just had to adjust your eyes with. It felt like staring into a wall of just pure blackness, as if the space inside just didn't exist anymore. I couldn't see anything beyond the doorway. I remember just sitting there frozen, staring. I don't know how long I stayed like that, maybe 2 or 3 minutes, but at some point, I saw a hand come out of the darkness. It came out of it, and it was the same pitch black as the room itself. I couldn't see where the arm ended. It just extended from the void, the rest lost inside probably, but it didn't grab me, it just held itself out like it was offering, like it wanted me to take it. I didn't move. I just stared at it. Then, just as suddenly, it instantly retreated. My dad came out of the living room, probably to go to the bathroom, and he saw me sitting there. He asked me what I was doing and picked me up, carried me back to the bedroom and shut the door. And that's where the memory ends. I've tried to write it off as a dream, but I remember everything just so vividly. Every touch, the exact words my dad said. It felt so real. I've never had dreams that come even remotely close to this till now. I'm not saying that it was a ghost or a shadow figure or anything specific. I honestly have no idea what it was. And every time that someone brings up strange or paranormal experiences, this memory always comes back clear as day. Had it not have been for my dad, honestly, I don't know what would have happened. I miss that guy, and I hope that he's resting well. This happened in Hungary, summer of 2024. I was at my friend's place for the summer with his stepbrother. Us three are pretty good friends, and almost every night we went out into the woods or just walking past them. We have strange minds that we want to see something strange no matter what, and that's why we were there. Well, one night we actually did. We were going home already. It was pretty late, probably around 11 o'clock or so. We agree on checking one last place and going home after that. We went to the place, and it was an abandoned horse ranch, not far from my friend's house. We saw a random humanoid-like creature on the end of the road. It was full white and glowing, but it didn't light the ground nor trees around it. We wanted to go close to see what it was. We started walking towards it when it suddenly looked like it turned around. It wasn't walking away, it just sort of stood in one place. At that, we panicked and we ran home. At home, we started shouting and yelling at each other because none of us knew what it was, and everybody said different things than the other. But we agreed on going back and finding out what it was to see who was right. The second time we went there, amazingly, we saw it again, because it was still there apparently. This time we went closer, when all of a sudden we heard a dog barking at us and we ran away. The dog was white like the creature and stood on an empty plain on our right side. And it's really strange too, because we all had the same experience, but we all saw completely different things. Like, I saw the dog, it was big and white, no fence between us nor chain on the dog. My friend didn't see it but heard it bark, and the others saw different things too. The strange part is that, obviously, we run at different speeds. There was like almost 10 meters to 15 meters difference between us, but we all heard it directly behind us, like it was on our heels. And when at the end of the street, we stopped and looked back, the dog, or whatever it was, had disappeared. My guess is that that humanoid thing was a, hallucination sort of image that was projected upon us. But what do you think? What could this creature have actually been? When I was 13 years old, I used to leave the school during lunch break and accompany my friend, as she used to eat her lunch at home, a custom in UK schools, and then come back to school once lunch had ended. I wasn't supposed to eat lunch from home, but managed to trick the teachers, and this was due to being pressured by my friend to join her. Her house was only a 2-minute walk away, and I remember that you had to pass by an alleyway which looked very creepy, and anytime we walked past the alleyway, I would get this sort of unsettling feeling. Well, one day, it was a Friday, and I really didn't want to leave with my friend, but she would peer pressure me all the time. I remember the weather being really bad. It was raining heavily. The sky looked grey and dull, and there was a huge wind outside. I kept telling my friend that we should just stay at school this time, but she insisted that we go to her house. We exited the school gates and walked up the street to head to the alley, which you had to get to the top of the street and then turn left. I was casually walking, and I noticed my friend was no longer beside me. She had this sort of deer-in-the-headlights look and was frozen still. That's when I could see a guy walking towards our direction who was covered all in black, and only his eyes were visible. My friend tapped me on the shoulder to gesture me to turn around, and she started speed walking with me closely behind her. It didn't take us long to get all the way back to school, as we were already near the area, and my friend starts running as we reached the gates and screamed loudly. I freaked out and asked her what was wrong, and she told me that the man was carrying a knife. I remember being visibly freaked out by that, and we told a friend about it, who told us to speak to these teachers, who then called the police. The police took our statements separately while we were both at home, but later stated that we were lying because our answers didn't match up. I don't remember the exact questions, but I remember the wording was confusing. They would ask me how many feet the man was away from us and would tell me to compare my answer to a bus or a car. They did check the CCTV footage and saw both me and my friend running, but no footage of the man. Years later, I would be somewhat haunted by that incident too. That whole area used to freak me out, and I remember a murder happening in the same area where 2 elderly women were stabbed to death. During my early 20s, I used to do voluntary work at a hospital and once decided to walk into that area to go home. And I felt freaked out, and I decided to not go there ever again. To set the scene, we're a bunch of young girls in high school, year 8. Of course, we've all heard about Ouija boards after watching scary movies, and we all wanted to try it. One afternoon after school, but before we did the board, we went into an abandoned home in our small town. One of the girls said that a local teen had beat the older man to death that had lived there apparently. It was creepy, and I remember feeling like we just shouldn't have been in there. But there we were. And regrettably, I think, we were really rough in there too, picking up random pieces of junk and just throwing it around, just being a bunch of dumb and disrespectful teens. There wasn't any real furniture or belongings, but we were still being jerks, and anyway, we leave, and in an empty paddock just across from the creepy dead man's house, we decided that this was a great spot to summon spirits. What was wrong with us, right? Anyway, I can't remember which one of us made the board, not me, but we four sat down in a circle and did all the usual mumbo-jumbo questions. Now, I wish that I could remember exactly what the spirit board said, but I know that I took my hand off the planchette in fear a few times, and so did the others too. Of course, we didn't say goodbye or any of that. We all got freaked out by a spirit named Bob, and that was that. Time went on, and I no longer talked to those childhood friends. Not to do with this spooky stuff, but I can't find out again exactly what they experienced, but I'm also still freaked out about the stuff that started going down and wouldn't know how to even start that conversation, to be honest. But over the next few weeks or so, at least two of my friends said that they had really messed up dreams. I then started being woken up at 3 a.m. every night. Bang on 3, I would just wake up and feel really creeped out and look over at the digital clock to see what the time was. I was so scared that I was sleeping with the lights on, but it would still happen. I had started having general anxiety too and bad panic attacks, but I just didn't know what was happening. I thought that I was going mental, but I just kept it all to myself. As it so happens, while all this negative stuff was happening, my parents had recently split and I was in the process of moving interstate with just my mum. My friends had thrown me in a going away party and invited half the school year. I remember not having a good time at all during the party because of my anxiety, but everyone else was running wild and having a good time, so I suppose it was okay. Pretty late that night, a small group of people came back after going for a walk though, and they had tried messing around with the spirits again. One of my year mates, a guy, was so distressed and he kept saying that he saw a vision of his family dying. So what do a bunch of 14 to 15-year-olds drinking and partying do? Ignore it and carry on. I, for one, was not wanting a bar of that though, and a few weeks later, and it's moving time for myself and my mum. All my furniture was packed up, but because my dad was staying in the house, I just slept on the couch in the lounge room. The weird 3 a.m. wakings up had been still happening, but not every night now. But this last night in the family home was absolutely terrifying. I went to sleep on the couch and it was pitch black in the lounge room. I was dreaming a bunch of nonsense as usual, and in the dream, I was in our backyard near the clothesline. I remember seeing some friends and family members, and then all of a sudden they all dropped to the ground like they died. I then heard my name being called, clear as day, but it was some weird, twisted voice. I woke up in the dead of night, and it was darkness all around. I looked around the darkness, and then I looked down to the foot of the couch, and there, standing there, was a dark and big manly figure, just looking over me. I distinctly remember knowing someone was there, and I sort of weakly called out, "Dad." There was no answer. At this point, I tried to look for some eyes or a face or something, but all I could see were these red-looking eyes. And I know that they were a faded color, but red-colored eyes were definitely there staring at me. Think of any time you've woken up in the dark and tried to find whoever was disturbing you. You can sort of see them and know that they're there, but it's not super clear, right? Whatever or whoever was there, they were a bad presence. Well, then, I think I did what any other kid would do and put the blankets over my head and tried to breathe quietly. I was wishing whatever it was to just go away and everything would be okay. I couldn't tell you how long I was under the covers for and trying to breathe from a tiny part that I made in the covers, but I somehow fell asleep for a tiny bit when the sun started to rise again until my mum woke me up. Of course, I didn't tell my mum or anyone what had happened. It was such a surreal thing to experience as a 14-year-old going through all the other hormonal and high school stuff that I just moved to the other state, tried to integrate into school and put it all in the back of my mind. But I just knew that bad juju was going to stay back at the old family house, now my dad's place. Over the next year and a half, a lot of changes happened with family, and I did end up living back at that house, studying a diploma in music that I could only do in Sydney. There was only one more incident not long after I moved back in, but man, was it scary. I was home alone and I was sitting at the computer desk. It was situated behind a wall, and if you looked through the doorway just to the right of the desk, you could see the kitchen and the small living area. I was messing about on MSN Messenger at the time, and then felt a sudden shot of unease come over me. Then I heard a loud bang like someone had slammed the oven door shut, but so loud, and even the lights flickered a bit. It was just the yuckiest, scariest feeling that I'd ever had. I jumped up and looked into the kitchen, and I couldn't see anything. I then ran out the back door and grabbed the cordless landline on my way out, and called my dad. I would have sounded mad to him, I know, but all I could say was something was weird in the house and please come home soon. I don't remember what happened ghost-wise moving forward after that. I guess I suppressed a bit and then got busy with life, but I do know that I used to sneak into pubs with my TAFE friends and come home pretty, messed up, and that obviously helped a bit, I think. Then I grew up and eventually I moved out. But those memories I still have are so freaky. In the end, my advice is don't mess with Ouija boards when you're a dumb teen. Or, in fact, ever. I've been debating on sharing this for a few weeks now, and I figured why not, right? I mean, spooky season is practically here already. So, this happened back in October of 2013, during my senior year of high school. My sister, who could really be called a medium, and I had been browsing the web for urban legends when we stumbled upon an article about a game known as the Game of 100 Candles. In short, this game was a sort of ritual, very similar to the way Bloody Mary is supposed to work. So, to put a long story short, the people playing this game had to light 100 candles and tell a ghost story and then blow out one of the candles. At the end of the game, you should have conjured 100 separate spirits. And, like every ritual game, it warns you to play at your own risk. But, no big deal, right? None of these things are real. So, we found a night where our mum wouldn't be home until after 2 AM and planned for our game. My sister, her best friend T, and another friend N, and myself prepared for our night. We waited until our mum left and for the sun to begin to set, and then we proceeded to set up our kitchen. We set up 100 tea candles on the counter and found a box of matches, and as the sun sank lower, we shut off the lights in our house and opened up our glass door, so the smoke from the candles wasn't too bad, and turned off our cell phones. And around 7:30, once it was perfectly dark, we started the game by lighting the candles. At first, we just told light-hearted stories, like I saw a ghost and it went boo kind of thing. As we finished the first 10 candles, there was a palpable change in the atmosphere around us, though. The air had a static feel to it, and the hair on my neck and my arms began to stand on end. As mentioned, my sister qualifies as a medium who can see and feel things that are not apparent to the naked eye, and even she began to squirm in her chair. As we started the next set of candles, 11 to 20 this time, the house became painfully quiet, and the stories also began to grow darker. The stories that we told went from silly folklore to
real-time accounts of just strange things that we had seen. As the candles were blown out, we began hearing creaking and cracking around us. Now, we did live in an older house, but the house never groaned or cracked. Well, at least not this loudly before. So, we finished the next set of 10 and everyone playing was visibly beginning to feel uncomfortable. I mean, the laughter had stopped and a more somber tone had taken over. Again, we ignored the strange sounds and just continued to play. As the time passed and it grew closer to 8:45, the game took a sour turn though. The cracks and the creaks became louder and more frequent, and as the 25th candle was blown out, we heard the distinct sound of someone pulling into the driveway, shutting a car door and walking up the deck to enter through the glass doors. We waited, but the motion lights on our driveway just never lit up, and nobody ever came to the door, and then we heard footsteps leading back across the deck and out of earshot. One of our friends suggested that we pause to look outside and make sure our mum had not returned home early or something, and she hadn't. At this point, my sister suggested using a dowsing pendulum. Our friends agreed, and we laid out the rules of clockwise for yes and counterclockwise for no, and saying goodbye and whatnot. My sister then asked the room, "Is someone here with us?" And the pendulum began to rapidly swing in a clockwise direction. Our friend, Anne, asked, "Is there more than one of you here?" And the pendulum began to swing clockwise again. Anne said that this was some sort of bullshit and took the pendulum himself. I asked, "Did you come because we played the game?" Again, the pendulum swung clockwise. And finally, T provoked it by saying, "If you really are there, why don't you prove it?" And promptly, we heard a loud thud against the wall behind us. We decided that we were just freaking ourselves out though, and someone must have been fucking with us and had obviously managed to throw something in the dark to make the thudding noise. But curiosity got the better of us, and Anne suggested that we just keep playing, so we did. He told a story about seeing a spectre in his dreams once, then seeing it in real life. He put out the 26th candle and 2 others blew out. At this time, my sister, she became visibly frightened. The reason was unknown to us until later, but she claims that at this time, she saw a solid black mass moving down the hallway towards us. It felt like the house had become 10 degrees cooler after this candle was blown out too, and we all felt that. We sat in silence for a moment before Anne says, "If you're really here, I need a sign." And this is when shit just really hit the fan. We heard heavy, loud footsteps coming down the hallway and the doors creaking open. The flames of the candles started to waver with no wind, and Anne grabbed my hand and whispered that something was breathing behind him, even though I'm seated to his right and my sister and her friend are directly across from us and we couldn't see anything. Anne freezes up though, and then turns around suddenly with nothing behind him. And then, with nothing near it, the doors that we had left open slowly creak shut, with no wind present. Then, T says that someone is touching his arm, and then his neck, and then his face. At this time, we just decided to stop playing. I believe the exact phrase was, "Fuck this, I'm done, say goodbye." So, we did. We extinguished the rest of the candles and began turning on the lights and moving as a group, and although the candles were out and the game was over, there was still this really heavy feeling all around. We moved to our dining room, where we had heard the thud earlier, to turn the rest of the lights on. We entered the room as a group and turned on the lights, and Halloween decorations littered the ground like they'd been thrown from their original places. On top of our server was my mum's old battery-powered witch. Her motor had burned out years ago, and we never put batteries in anymore, and she was just simply sitting there. But we started hearing a cracking noise from the corner of the room. We slowly turned around to see that the witch was rocking and bringing her wrinkled hands together, slowly getting faster and faster until the witch just fell over. As her body hit the ground, around, we heard the loud bang of a door or cabinet slamming shut somewhere else in the house too. And suddenly, our friend T screamed that his face was burning. We turned around and he had a small scratch on his face and a trickle of blood was running down his cheek. And that was it. We grabbed phones and keys and just ran out of the house, dropped our friends off and didn't return home until much, much later. When we did eventually return home though, another friend came over to stay up with us until our mum got home. We turned on cartoons and cranked the volume and just tried to ignore the banging and the footsteps and the heavy breathing that wandered through our house for the rest of the night. In the years following our night of playing 100 Candles, we've seen quite a bit of activity in our home. I've shared this in other places, but I sincerely believe that this was a catalyst for the activity in our home. I have since moved, but my sister, she remains in our home and still frequently experiences phenomena, including seeing the shadowy figure occasionally. Hindsight is 20/20, and we really should have listened to the warnings, I know, but we were young and curious. Many years ago, I worked on an ambulance first responding to 911 calls and all that. One day, we were dispatched to a person not acting right type of call. When my partner and I arrived at the apartment complex, the first thing we noted was that all the people, except for the patient that were living in the same unit, they were standing outside with terrified looks on their faces, shaking violently. It was raining and it was nighttime outside, but I quickly approached them and asked what was going on. The 25-year-old male looked at me and said, "Yeah, so we were just playing a game when suddenly my girlfriend just started shrieking and screaming. All the lights went out, including the candles, and then we saw her lay on her stomach on top of the board game. My girlfriend's head, hands and legs, they all went into the air, and then suddenly she just fell to the floor, stood up and ran into the back of the apartment." My partner and I then cautiously walked up the steps to the apartment door with the mag lights. The door was already cracked open, so I politely knocked and introduced myself as a 911 ambulance paramedic before walking inside the apartment unit. The light switch didn't work, but I could hear a creaking wooden noise in the background, just squeaking back and forth. All the walls were painted dark colors like black and maroon, and it was obvious that these people liked heavy metal, skulls, and dark paintings because they were represented all over the walls. I started walking through the apartment calling out for the patient, looking for any sign of her. As I walked deeper and deeper into the unit, it just started getting colder and colder. Finally, I saw her in a rocking chair. She was slowly rocking back and forth and just looking straight forward. I introduced myself to her and asked her what's going on. There was no answer from her, and she just kept rocking back and forth. I got up close to her looking for any medical abnormalities, and her eyes were so dark. Either her pupils were that big or her eye color was just that dark. But all of her other vital signs were pretty normal. Her blood sugar was normal. She didn't appear to be having any seizure activity or anything. I tried to get a painful stimulus out of her by squeezing the shoulder or a sternal rub, but she wouldn't even flinch. I couldn't find any track marks on her too for drug use or anything, and throughout all of this, she just kept rocking back and forth, just looking straight forward. The rule of thumb for paramedics now for this situation, and not being alert to person, place, time or event, is that she needs to go to the hospital. I tell her that since she's not talking with me, I'll be moving her to a stretcher. And suddenly, the rocking just stops. I mean, all sound everywhere just stops. I can only hear breathing noises now. Well, I lift under her armpits and my partner lifts under her legs, and as we lift, we notice something really strange. The patient stays in a seated form, like completely rigid. We lay her on the stretcher and wheel her to the inside of the ambulance, and as we load her into the back, cracking noises like breaking tree branches filled the air. I look over at her and notice now that she's looking right at me with a huge, scary, crazed smile on her face. And no matter where I moved, her head and eyes just tracked me with that same unwavering smile too. My partner looks over at me sympathetic, knowing that I'll have to be in the back with her. I playfully say, "Good, now maybe you'll talk to me." We begin riding to the hospital, and the heat was on full blast in the back of the ambulance, but no matter how hard we pumped it, it just wouldn't heat up. But she was still smiling that big toothy smile and staring at me too, and not answering any of my questions. I looked down to grab my pen that fell on the floor and then looked back up, and out of nowhere, the highest pitched screams and shrieks filled the air as she started lunging at me and grabbing at me. She clashed her teeth and bit at me in my direction, trying all that she could to break loose. Luckily, the stretcher seatbelts were secured to her, making me just out of reach. The huge crazed smile broke into a frightening look of terror and then anger, and my back was against the wall of the box. Luckily, we were already at the hospital, unintentionally a Catholic one, mind you, and as the ambulance drove in, the patient stopped all she was doing. She calmly looked straight back forward and just went mute again. We brought her into the ER and talked with the doctor about what had happened, who, needless to say, was pretty astonished by the story. So, a bit of backstory first. I've been best friends with this girl since high school, I think, for probably close to 15 years now, in fact. I used to practically spend more time at her house than my own. Her parents are great people, and they treated me like another daughter because my parents are pretty awful themselves. However, my best friend started dating a guy about 1.5 years ago, and since they got serious, we haven't hung out much at all. She has since bought a house and moved in with him too, and I spend a lot more time at their house now, but it's been nearly 2 years since I've spent any time in her parents' home aside from going over there for the holidays and whatnot. At some point though, within the past year or so, her mum got really into estate sales. She would go and buy antiques and then either fill her house up with them or try to resell them on eBay. I don't know if this is related to the experiences that I've been having, but I find it hard to believe that these strange occurrences have nothing to do with all the objects belonging to the dead people that they now have in their house. Anyway, my best friend's parents contacted me about pet sitting for them while they went on vacation for a week. I was glad to do it because I owe them a lot, and honestly, I love their 3 dogs. I've known them since they were puppies, and they had the 3 dogs shut in the tiled kitchen or dining sunroom area using a baby gate. That way, if there were any accidents, it was easy to clean since there was no carpet. Plus, the oldest dog, a bulldog, overheats easily, so he likes to be sprawled out on the tiles. The bowls of dog food and water were left out for them, and I was supposed to head over there for 2 or 3 times a day to just spend maybe an hour there. No big deal. So, the first day I showed up to let the dogs outside, I do all my other duties. The gate between the kitchen and the rest of the house had been knocked down though. It was honestly not really something that I had thought twice about. The dogs probably knocked it over themselves being bored or something. But 2 of the dogs were still in the kitchen though. The gate had fallen in a way that prevented them from easily getting out. The bulldog was missing though, which was a little weird because he couldn't easily get over the gate either, but I figured he probably kicked it over behind him and wandered off to nap somewhere or something. But because of his age, he is definitely the least likely to make a mess or cause trouble, so I wasn't too worried. But I realized that meant that I had to check the rest of the house for any accidents just to be safe. But first, I get the other 2 outside. I was going to list the things that I have to do: feed the fish, refill the food and the water bowls, etc., when I get this kind of weird feeling. The bulldog is mostly blind, but he normally would have come wiggling to greet me, and all the noise I'd been making with the food would definitely have brought him over. So I started calling the dog and looking for him. I immediately heard him barking, but I couldn't find him anywhere. I looked at all of his favourite spots, but there was nothing. At this point, I was in full panic mode, mostly because I could hear the dog but just couldn't see him, so I felt like I was losing my mind or something. Finally, out of desperation, I started throwing open doors upstairs, and I find him scared out of his wits shut in the guest bedroom. This made me feel really uneasy. My best friend's parents had been renovating the upstairs at their house, so the carpets were torn up and all the furniture was moved into storage. But they had shut all the doors before leaving to keep all the cats out of them because all of the tools and the stuff laying around them could have hurt them. So, how the hell did one of the dogs get one of the doors open and then manage to get shut inside too? I mean, the gate coming down, I'd been totally willing to write off as accidental, but finding the dog shut inside of a bedroom that I'd known had been closed off just made me feel really scared. So, I called my friend and told her what had happened, mostly to keep myself occupied while I'm still at the house. She told me that her parents had actually bought a really nice dog gate before they left, but had forgotten to unpack it, and that I could open it and set it up if I thought that that would help. So I found the giant box by the front door, emptied it, and got to work. It took the better part of an hour to set up, but it was this really good quality pressure-locked gate. It was made of metal, it came up to chest height, so probably around 4 feet tall, I'd say, and takes 2 hands to open. And let me tell you, there was just no way that a dog could knock this down accidentally. Like I said, 2 hands are required to open it too. There are like 2 parts to the locking mechanism. You have to sort of hold this button down with one hand in order to slide the lock off with the other hand. So, content with a job well done, I left that night and went home to my own dogs. The next morning, I came back to find no issue. The gate had worked. But when I headed there after work that night, my heart dropped to my stomach. Somehow, the gate had been opened. Not knocked down as if the dogs had done it, but opened. And the rest of the gate was still in place between the door frame. I refused to believe that the dogs had somehow opened it. Again, the bulldog was missing too. And again, I found him shut in the same room upstairs. Day 3, I go back expecting more of the same stuff, and I'm practically prepared for it this time. But it just gets so much worse. So, the kitchen and the dining room and the sunroom and the living room are all arranged in a sort of circle. From the living room, you head into the kitchen, and from the kitchen, you move into the dining room or the sunroom, and then from there, you can head through a door into the living room. However, the door between the living room and the sunroom is always locked. Not just closed, but actually locked. And to keep anyone from getting any funny ideas, they actually have a chair directly in front of the door, blocking it from opening. The reason they do this is because the way that the door swings open, if someone were to open it, the door would hit their expensive sound equipment for their TV. This door is not used regularly and has not been used since I met her. In fact, they had recently put a treadmill in the sunroom that totally blocks the door from being used. What I'm trying to say is that that's how infrequently this door is used. Anyway, I walked into the house that night and was greeted by the dogs. Okay, I guess the gate is opened again. Awesome. Except this time, the gate was opened. And so was the door to the living room. The armchair that blocks the door had been pushed out of the way too, and the door itself was unlocked. The key is left in the lock usually, and the door was just flung wide open. Now, while I do believe in the paranormal, I am naturally a pretty massive skeptic. I really don't believe any of the stories that I read online or any of the things that I see on TV. But at this point, I am terrified of my friend's parents' house. I know it hasn't been anything really bad, but I just don't want to be alone when that weird stuff is going on. Even if the door was somehow just accidentally unlocked, unlikely mind you, but since I didn't personally check, who knows? I can't think of a rational explanation for how that chair moved. And I also don't have an explanation for the dog being shut in the one room, especially the second time it happened, when I know that I personally double-checked the door and made sure that it was firmly shut. I love and respect the family a lot, but I don't know how to tell them that I can't pet sit for them anymore. I just don't want to be in that house alone anymore. Anyway, I finished the pet sitting many days ago, and I went back a handful of times with either my sister or my best friend, never alone, mind you. And at the times I went to check on the dogs with someone else, there was nothing weird. But I'm currently in the talks with them about setting up a camera, so I'll keep you updated if there's anything further. This happened a few years ago when I was around 20 or so, I'd say. I was hanging out with my buddy Matt at my apartment, located in the downtown area of a medium-sized Midwestern city. We were drinking whiskey, watching comedies, playing tunes, etc. He mentions that he has a close friend, Emily, who used to live in my apartment building with her mother, and she now apparently lives across the street from me, and he thought it would be a really good idea if we met because apparently we're very similar and I was single and ready to mingle at that point in my life, so why not? So he rings her cell and tells her to come by my place. She arrived at my apartment and I instantly became fond of her. She was hilarious, was very pretty, and a musician just like me. She was around 30, so 10 years older than me. My friend Matt was 35. I've always had friends that are much older for some reason, and we played songs together and laughed hysterically for hours. Matt decided to go home, leaving us two alone, and we chilled for a while longer, ended up making out and got all of her contact info before she told me that she was going home and that we should meet up soon. Over the next few weeks, we develop a strong relationship and we hang out almost daily. I would throw some pajamas on and just walk across the street and we'd get wasted and watch movies together. Quite honestly, it was just really awesome. After arriving home from my 10-day trip to New York City, things got really weird though. The day that I returned, she asked if she could come over, so I unpacked all my stuff and then told her to stop by. She rings the buzzer, takes the elevator 7 floors up to my apartment, and lets herself in. I was talking non-stop about all of the awesome things I did and the people I met in New York City, and I could just immediately tell that she didn't want to hear any of it. She would change the subject every time I brought it up, and eventually she just said, "Can you stop talking about New York? I really don't give a fuck." I was surprised to hear her speak like this. The Emily that I'd been getting to know was not like that. She was caring and passionate and just an amazing person. Or so I thought. Fast forward to a few nights later, and I had just gotten home from working a 12-hour shift and I collapsed in bed, ready to pass out for the night. It's about 9 p.m. and I get a text from Emily that says, "Hey, what's up?" I don't feel much like replying at that moment because honestly, I'm just too exhausted and our last hangout was just too weird for me to comprehend, so I'm still trying to decide how to deal with that. So I plug my phone into charge and turn off the lights and just fall asleep pretty effortlessly. But then, I wake up to somebody pounding on my door and screaming at the top of their lungs, "Open the fucking door, let me in now." My entire apartment reeks like cigarette smoke, and I grab my phone from beside my bed, my heart beating 1,000,000 miles per hour, 27 missed phone calls, a bunch of text messages, all from Emily, and I scan through the text while she's still at the door screaming, trying to break down my door. The most recent text from her is a long one claiming that I'm a piece of shit for not responding to a text earlier, and that she's coming over to beat the shit out of me for not doing so. But she had a key to the building still, from when she used to live there. So I get out of bed, nearly having a panic attack, and try to decide what my next move should be. Should I open the door to calm her down? Should I call the police? Should I just ignore her? I decide to open the door though, and she begins wailing on me, swinging her arms, trying to hit me. she was smoking a cigarette and there were 3 cigarette butts on the ground next to her. Smoking indoors was prohibited in my apartment building. She was very obviously on some sort of drug though. She just kept screaming at me, telling me how awful I am for not responding to her text messages, slurring her speech and losing her balance. I was somehow able to calm her down and I took her to the roof of the apartment building, which had a pretty nice enclosed picnic table area. We sat beside one another and she was quiet now, finally. She kept asking me how I could be such an asshole and that I need to explain myself. And the look in her eyes was just pure evil as she spoke to me in this calm demeanor. I said to her, "Emily, I don't ever want to speak to you again after tonight. This whole scenario is absolutely insane. You need help. Let me walk you home." I take her home and I return to my apartment to attempt sleeping again, at which I don't succeed this time. A couple of days later, I return home from work and there's an envelope taped to my door. I open it and it's a handwritten letter from Emily apologizing and saying that I'm a beautiful human who doesn't deserve an evil person like her in their life. There was a candy bar attached to the envelope too, one that I'd never heard of that she always told me that I needed to try. I never spoke to her again after this, but from what Matt tells me, which by the way, he always knew that she was a problematic person, she's a heavy user of crack now and is working as a food runner in a restaurant nearby. Needless to say, I did not try that candy bar. I worked at a local government agency for a long time. Each summer, we would get a new crop of interns too. Most of them were fine, but some caused issues, like when we caught 2 of them actually making out in the file room. But overall, they were just normal kids from high school or college just trying to get some work experience. In 2016, my department received an intern later than usual though, right in the middle of the summer. Warner was a bit older than the usual crowd, around my age in fact, maybe late 20s. We initially hit it off pretty well, and although I found him sort of strange, I didn't mind since he was friendly and we had some common interests. He was the only person in my department who was even close to my age too, so that was kind of nice. But the interns were all teenagers and the regular staff averaged around 60, older than my mum, so I was pretty psyched to have a peer to chat with. So occasionally, I would eat lunch with Warner or stop to talk in his cubicle and whatnot. His strangeness was mostly an outsized personality, a mix of over-the-top enthusiasm with a bit of social awkwardness. I got zero bad vibes from the guy, if I'm being honest. But it wasn't long before Warner started having major performance problems at work. He would produce little to no work on most days, no show or arrive late without informing anyone, and generally just acted unprofessionally. One day, he showed up for work at 3:15 p.m. when our workday ended at 4:30. The office manager was livid and told him to just go home. His behavior bothered nearly everyone in my office too, but I didn't supervise him and we had plenty of slacker interns in the past. While his antics were a bit of a spectacle, it wasn't a big deal to me. Now, if you're wondering why he wasn't let go, 2 words: political favor. I found out from Warner himself that he was hired because his uncle donated to the campaign of our big boss. In other words, he wasn't going anywhere. And near the end of that summer though, I put in my notice that I was leaving my job and relocating to a new state. Once Warner caught wind of this, he would constantly complain that it sucked that I was leaving because we barely had time to become friends. I would always laugh lightly in response and give him a sympathetic yeah, but he would start to monopolize my time at work more and more, and it became disruptive to the people who sat near me in fact. I found it slightly annoying, but I also was extremely happy to be leaving that job for reasons unrelated to Warner, and I spent my last month there not caring much about my co-workers and what they thought. So I tolerated him lingering by my desk. One day though, he caught me leaving work and offered me a ride home. I usually took the bus, and occasionally other co-workers would offer me rides home if they were going my way, so this didn't seem odd to me. I accepted and walked to his car with him. And man, it smelled awful and was just full of garbage. He hastily cleared off the passenger seat and apologized, and we got on our way. But once we were on the main road, he started begging me to stop and get dinner with him. I laughed and said that he didn't need to ask me that insistently, and said that we could stop at a diner on the way. We had a nice meal with pleasant conversation, and he was intelligent and had a variety of interests. Our political positions aligned, and we shared disdain for our cranky old co-workers. Quite honestly, I had a good time. I expressed too that he didn't need to drive me all the way home now that it was getting late, but he kept insisting, so I just relented in the end. As I directed him toward my house, he started in again with the whining about how our developing friendship was cut short because I was moving. At this point, I was tired of hearing this. The decision to leave my job and move away from home was extremely difficult to make anyway, and I was proud of how bold I was being. I stopped responding and laughing, and his whining faded out. We came up to the turn to get onto my street, and when I pointed it out, he accelerated and drove right past it, laughing. I laughed in a "what the hell are you doing" kind of way, thinking that he was just joking around. When I began giving directions about how to turn around and get back, he started begging me to keep hanging out with him because he was lonely. This immediately set me on high alert. It suddenly hit me that I'm in a man's car, someone that I don't know that well, who doesn't exercise proper behavior at work, which is the only context I know him. And now he's displaying really weird behavior outside of work as well. My instinct was to not insist I be let out of his car. I felt as if this would escalate the situation into something negative, and in hindsight, it may have been the right thing to do when I think about the type of person he turned out to be. So I told him that we could hang out at the park near my house if he wanted to talk sometime. He seemed to like that idea, and we parked and walked over. The pleasant conversations resumed, and beside the weird clinginess, he was perfectly fine to talk to. Until he dumped his entire life story on me, including his prior arrest for theft, his heroin addiction, and related struggles with depression. I tried to be sympathetic, but I was very put off by this. It was a lot of highly personal information all at once, and I was still on alert because of his prior behavior, mind you. I tried changing the subject by showing him pics of my dog. I scrolled one pic too far, and the next one was a photo of me wearing makeup and posing cutely, way differently than the slob I was at work. He grabbed the phone and went, "Wow, you're very photogenic." I felt awkward and didn't say anything. There was a long silence, and then he launched into a weird tangent about how compatible we are and that we have similar interests, etc., and that he wishes I wasn't moving so that we could try hanging out again, but on a date this time. I didn't say anything, and he broke the silence with, "Sorry, I'm saying all of this stuff. I'm actually high right now. That's why I know where Riverside, a bad neighborhood that had previously come up in conversation, is, and I went there yesterday to buy. Otherwise, I wouldn't have said it, and I'm really sorry." Internally, I freaked out at this. He had definitely put his drug addiction in the past tense, and I assumed that it was something he was recovering from, not currently using. I also realized that I had been in a car that he was operating while he was under the influence. I don't know anything about heroin, so I was pretty clueless, but I felt very, very stupid at this point. He immediately started whining and begging me not to judge him or hate him, and just kept saying over and over again how nice I am and how understanding I am, that I'm pretty and smart. All of these weird compliments interspersed with talking down about himself. I didn't know what to do, so I just smiled reassuringly and told him not to worry, but that I was tired and I needed to go home. And that's when he started crying. He had this really weird wheezy sob too, but no tears were coming out. I sat there silently while he did this, trying to come up with some sort of graceful escape plan. But my patience was wearing thin at this point, and my anxiety was through the roof. It's a weird feeling to be annoyed and panicky at the same time, so I stood up and apologized, said the park was close to my house, so I'll walk, and started to leave when I remembered that I left all of my stuff in his car. Trying a new approach, I casually mentioned that I forgot my stuff in his car and joked that if he wanted my dirty lunch containers, he could keep them. He ceased his bizarre crying and stood up and ran over to his car to unlock it, and I grabbed my stuff out of the back seat. His demeanor changed drastically as he calmly apologized for making things weird and asked if he could drop me off at home so I didn't have to walk alone at night. I said yes in the end, but made him drop me off a block over from my little side street so that he wouldn't see which house was mine. Now, I could end it there, but what bothered me the most about this guy happened after this encounter, and I'll try to make this part short. So, a week or two after that weird evening at the end of August by this point, I had my last day at the job and moved 1,000 miles across the country. Warner would sometimes text me with long ramblings detailing his feelings about himself and about our missed opportunity, and I didn't respond to these messages. But now that I wasn't near him, I didn't feel the need to placate. The text stopped after a few weeks, and quite honestly, I just forgot about it. Fast forward to February, and I get a text from a former co-worker. Her message said, "Sorry you had to hear about it this way," and her text message was a link to a local news article titled, "Man Dies from Wounds in Riverside Stabbing on Wednesday." Because of the way she worded it, I thought Warner was the victim, but when I read the article, it included his mugshot and the charges. Apparently, he was the attacker and he actually murdered someone. I felt so shocked and disgusted that I couldn't believe I knew someone who killed another human. Later on, I called an old co-worker for some details. Apparently, shortly after I left the job, he was fired for trashing the men's bathroom. Just threw around anything that he could lift and poured all the soap out and smeared it all over the place. He then apparently lost his apartment too. Presumably some of the articles about the stabbing describe Warner as a homeless man. I have to assume that that's how he ended up in the aforementioned Riverside. There are a lot of homeless drug addicts who squat in abandoned houses there. At the time, I wondered if the man he'd stabbed had refused to give him something that he wanted, and that is how he reacted to a hard no. I don't think I made all the wisest decisions during my interactions with Warner, but man, I'm glad I was able to avoid setting him off like that, since he was clearly not stable at all. Hands down, that was the worst intern I ever encountered. So this was about 3 years ago on a dark stretch of road near a main intersection in a major Bay Area city. I worked at a big-name, healthy grocery store from 2014 to 2017. I was lucky to meet and work with amazing co-workers, some of whom have become my best and closest friends, in fact. One of my best friends, at the time and to this day, Cav, is one of the nicest, most caring people that I've ever met. He's incredibly generous, genuine and warm and welcoming to just about everyone, sometimes to a fault in fact. At the time of this story, I'm a woman in my early 20s and Cav is a guy in his late 20s. Cav and I had a weekly ritual of driving around the city after work and just talking, sometimes about our problems, sometimes about what was going well, but it was therapeutic and always something to look forward to. This particular night, we invited our buddy Ben to join us. His department always got out 30 to 45 minutes after the rest of the store, so Cav and I decided that we should do a short drive around the area to just pass the time until Ben was off. Cav was driving that night too. So we did our drive and I headed back to the store to pick up Ben. In order to get back to the store too, we need to make a U-turn at a four-way intersection. To get to the intersection, we have to go down a dark but short stretch of road. There are no streetlights for some reason. I don't know why. The intersection is well lit though, and is always busy, and has a shopping centre and plazas on each side. From the dark section of the road, it's exactly 302 feet, according to Google Maps, to the main, well-lit and ever-busy intersection. So, as we're driving down the dark section, Cav suddenly interrupts what I was saying and says, "Oh shit, did you see that person waving?" He slows down the car as I look back. "No, what are you talking about?" I say. He says, "You didn't see them?" There was someone in a black hoodie waving us down. I'm looking back and I have poor eyesight. It's dark, so no, I don't see anyone. There's no one there. As I'm saying this, though, Cav is pulling into the empty parking lot parallel to the dark stretch of road. He reaches to the back seat and is moving jackets and other stuff off the seat, obviously making room for this person. I said to Cav, no one is getting in this car, do you understand? But he then says, if they need someone. But I interrupt and say, no, there's no one there, and even if there was, they could walk up to the fucking intersection, so no. He eventually agrees, but insists that we continue to circle around and check. I reluctantly agree, but realize that I have no choice anyway. So, we circle back, and sure enough, there is a girl, my age, in her early 20s, just standing alone wearing all black. She has a hoodie on. She looks disheveled and is sort of crying, maybe. The cab rolls down the passenger window, my window, about halfway, to which I roll it back up another quarter of the way and asks her if she's okay. She seems off to me, and I immediately have these awful vibes from her. She says with her hands over her face that 4 guys stole my purse. It had my wallet, and I literally lost everything, and I don't have a phone. The weirdest thing about this is that she wasn't actually crying. She was stretching her words out and kind of whining, but she wasn't crying. I said, okay, well, we'll call the police for you. Why don't you walk up to the well-lit plaza at the main intersection and we'll wait with you for the police? She adamantly says, no, it won't help. I already called the police an hour ago. And this is when I started to freak out. She just said that she didn't have a phone and that she's standing in the dark for an hour. I said to her, I thought you don't have a phone. And she said, I do, but it's just dead. All of this was happening rapid fire, and before I can really mentally get into what is going on, Cav tells her to get into the car so that we can help her. I say, walk up to the plaza to the intersection and we'll help you. But Cav unlocks the door and says, no, don't worry, we'll drive you there. The girl has her hands in her front pocket of her hoodie and gets into the car. And at this point, I am pissed. Absolutely fuming, in fact. The girl is acting super weird, and I remember at this point that I have my box cutter on me. I reach down into my backpack and am rummaging through my crap to find it. Cav is talking to her, but everything she says is contradictory. She says that she isn't from this area, has no idea where she is, yet she tells us that she grew up and lives about 6 blocks away. As we're driving, she says that she wants to go to a particular bar that she could actually use a drink. I said to her, I thought you don't have your wallet or ID. I keep looking for my box cutter and am looking back at her. She has a waxy complexion and looks into my eyes as if she's looking through me. And it gives me the fucking creeps. Cav is incredibly kind to her, idiot, and keeps saying positive things, trying to get to the bottom of what's going on. While this is happening, I find my box cutter, open it all the way and hold it in my lap. I turn back and keep my eyes on her. She tells us that she actually has a boyfriend nearby eventually and asks for us to take her there. She and Cav continue to talk, and she says that she was kicked out of her parents' house. Her hands still remain in her pocket, and mine remains holding the box cutter all this time. Because of this whole ordeal, we've totally forgotten about Ben at this point. Still watching her, I pull my phone out and call him. I'm explaining to Ben what's happening, and in a matter of seconds, she went from asking us for money and alcohol and just saying weird shit to just wanting to get out of the car. We didn't stop her at her boyfriend's house, but a few streets away, apparently in a random neighborhood. We drop her off, and there's silence for a few seconds in the car. And then Cav says, "Oh shit, she could have robbed us or killed us." Yeah, thanks, you fucking idiot. Anyway, I'm 100% certain that, at the very least, she was planning to rob us. Looking back on this, there's so much that I would have done differently, like calling the cops right away. We were lucky that nothing happened, but I'm positive that there was evil in that car that night. For a bit of context, I grew up in the middle of a farmland in a large 1800s Victorian home. Given its history, there has always been several shacks and barns that once belonged to the builder of this house. There's a highway that sees about maybe 3 cars on it during the night, and directly across from said highway, about 200 feet inward of a cornfield, is a shack that I've always found creepy. As kids, myself and friends would dare each other to go inside and look, which always ended up with us going as a team. Nothing scary was ever found, but it was always a bit of fun. Maybe a few broken glasses, metal piles of miscellaneous items. There was no electricity or any sort of utility that made it homely, though. So, the years go by and the existence of the shack becomes just a part of my daily life. However, one particular night, as I was watching TV, I noticed a light going off and on outside of my window. After initially getting a little bit startled, I just dismissed it as passing cars, simply more frequent than they typically are. An hour passes and it's nearing midnight and the light stays on. But this time, I know for sure that it's coming from outside. My family was asleep, but being my pansy 16-year-old self, I needed confirmation. But too bad for me that no one wants to go out and check it out, so I end up going alone. I grab my pocket knife and flashlight. It was the best that I can think of with my shaken thoughts, and I take off into the night. As I near the highway, the lights turn off, almost making me choke on air, but I had to figure out what the hell was going on in there. I eventually make it to the entrance of the shack, which has no door, and slowly begin to enter, my flashlight scanning the room for any sign of life. And what happened next, I'll never forget. 5 feet away from me, there's an old tattered recliner facing away that my father had tossed in there for future disposal. I shine my light on it because I knew I'd seen it rock ever so slightly, and as I did that, a man stands up from the recliner, saying absolutely nothing, and all I could tell was that he was middle-aged and wearing a jacket of sorts. Before I could even process what was happening, I was already sprinting across the road and praying that he wasn't behind me. It felt like years before I made it back to my door, but as I'm about to make it into safety, I decide to look back, and he was standing on the road, completely still, and no words whatsoever. It's been 7 years since then, and the shack still stands. The recliner remains in place, and my dad never believed me. I wish someone could share the dread that I had when I realized that the recliner was facing a window which was directed straight at my house. So this happened while I was still living in St. Louis, and I've since moved to Chicago. 2016 was a wild year for me, full of coming out of my shell and self-discovery. I found myself becoming more comfortable with using applications such as Grindr and Scruff to meet men online because I had social anxiety and had trouble meeting them elsewhere. But one night, I got a message from a seemingly average dude. He was very nice, super funny, was able to hold a conversation, and he was also not that bad looking, so I was intrigued and kept the conversation going. There were virtually no red flags about him, and I ended up exchanging numbers with him too. We get to texting, and after a week or so of solid conversation, we decide to meet up at a local cafe. I put on my best damn shirt, clean underwear, and I hit the road, and I'm excited. I was busy during the day, so we planned to meet at a local cafe around 8 PM. He doesn't live in the city like I do, so he was unfamiliar with the area. When we met, I was immediately enamored with this guy too. He was cute, he made me laugh, and surprise, he was who his photographs actually said he was. Nothing was strange about this guy, and he was just a cutie pie. And I was digging him, and by the feel of things, he was digging me too. What a twist, right? Anyway, at one point during the night, we were sharing memes with each other over the table. I show him one of the funniest that I have in my photos, and he nonchalantly grabs my phone from me to take a closer look. He started swiping on my phone for a minute, and at this point, I didn't think anything of it because I just assumed he was looking at the other memes I have saved. And no big deal. He gave me back my phone and then proceeded to show me some memes on his phone this time. A man who has a folder of saved memes on his phone is a true godsend, let me tell you. Anyway, the night goes on and the cafe is closing, so we decided to leave. As we're walking out together, he asks if I wanted to still hang out. I didn't feel comfortable letting him know where I lived just yet, so we just drove around the city listening to music and talking and whatnot. Just stuff like that. It was again just pretty normal, and we were just laughing and joking around, but at one point in the night, he turns to me at a red light and asks, "Do your roommates know you're on a date right now?" I laughed at this and just said, "No, why? Are you going to kill me?" I've honestly just read way too many things online, and that was my immediate reaction. He lightly just said, "I would use them as an emergency backup if I were you. You're probably right." I shot back, and we just continued with the night. It was nearing midnight, and I had a lot of laundry to do the next day, so I mentioned that we should probably just head home soon. He offered to drop me off at my house, but I didn't want him to know where I lived just yet, like I said, so I asked if he could just drop me off at the train instead, and he politely agreed. When I got home that night, I was totally thrilled with how things turned out. He was a total sweetheart, and I was really into him. So I opened up our conversation to shoot him a text message when I noticed at the bottom of our conversation was a notification that said, "You started sharing your location today at this time." I thought it was a little odd since I never used that feature, but I thought maybe I did it by accident or something and just turned it off. I sent him a follow-up text message saying that I had a really great time and would love to meet up with him again. But he didn't respond to this. I just assumed that he was busy and started browsing Reddit like the senseless fuck I am. I woke up the next morning and prepared to do my chores, washing my bed sheets, buying groceries, going to therapy. The grocery store was my last stop, and as I was ringing up all of my necessities, guess who was also in the self-checkout? It was the guy. Wow, imagine that. He immediately comes over and strikes up a conversation with me, and I thought it was odd as he previously mentioned that he doesn't live in the city and isn't very familiar with it, but the conversation was harmless, so I just kind of let it slide. A few weeks go by, and unfortunately, the conversations begin to dwindle, and we start talking less and less. But quite honestly, I'm used to this happening, I guess, so I just let it happen without pushing for answers. And eventually, we just stopped talking altogether. One night, I'm home alone just sitting down watching cartoons when there's a knock at the door. It was late, so I didn't feel comfortable answering, so I just sat there for a moment hoping that they'd just go away. And they knocked again, and more urgently this time. I peeked through the peephole and I made out two figures, and my heart immediately dropped as I recognized one of them in a hoodie or hat combo. He had an extremely defined jaw, so I was able to immediately recognize him. Well, I literally freaked the hell out and called one of my roommates to come home and that it was urgent. But when Andrew came home, he told me that he didn't see anybody near the apartment complex, so I calmed down a bit and explained the situation. It was also during this calming down period that I realized that he found out where I lived by my location sharing that he turned on while we were at the cafe. I didn't immediately turn it off when I got home, so he had plenty of time to figure out my coordinates, especially if he was watching the map immediately after he dropped me off at the train station. He never did show up again after this particular occurrence, and I never heard from him again either. I also noticed that our conversations disappeared from Grindr when I last checked, so I assumed that he must have blocked me. I still have no idea what he was planning to do, but I assume that he was just going to rob me. But it's completely possible that it could have been something worse. So, this all happened when I was in 8th grade. I lived down the street from my friends Dylan and Emon, and we used to hang out every single day after school, and after a while, we got into Ouija boards and such. We didn't have a real one, but we printed one offline and made a makeshift one using a hoop earring. We would play with it daily for about 2 months too, or longer even, in Dylan's basement in the laundry room. To clarify, Dylan's basement and laundry room, it had no windows. Dylan was a musical kid and he had a xylophone in his basement down there to play. I remember he actually taught me how to play Here Comes the Sun on it too. So, this particular day, we went into the basement and I played that tune on the xylophone because I thought I was hot shit doing so. I then laid the mallets down flat across the xylophone and we proceeded into the laundry room to play with the Ouija board. Backtracking a little bit though, we had played with it for a couple of months regularly at this point, like I mentioned. We had also become acquainted with some sort of spirit by this point as well. He hated talking about how he died and, in fact, just wouldn't do it, and was apparently enamored with me. But the earring moved so quickly and on its own too, a lot, so I was already pretty convinced, but of course, I wanted more. So, this one day, the last time the guys would play with it, I had asked the spirit for a sign. Yes, I know that that's dangerous and kind of against the rules, but the spirit agrees and I asked what we needed to pay attention to, and it told me the door. Hanging on the doorknob was a tie, and we waited for about 5 minutes and then the tie fluttered back and forth for a second. The guys were stunned because there was no passage of air anywhere within the basement, let alone the laundry room, and I, however, thought that it was pretty much nothing and certainly not enough to convince me. So, I ended up asking for another sign. Again, I know, stupid. When I asked though, the spirit obliged. I again asked what I needed to pay attention to and he told me to listen. We sat there for about another 5 to 10 minutes with pretty much nothing happening. And then, all of a sudden, we hear one loud ring of a singular xylophone key play out. We walk out of the laundry room and we find both the xylophone mallets are wedged in between the xylophone keys, just standing straight up. Nothing happened after this since the guys wouldn't play anymore, and honestly, I never got it to work in my house, but anyway, I hope you enjoyed the story. So, I don't know how to begin this, but I decided to share this to get some help because I'm just afraid to ask anyone I know personally. I'm 24 years old, a roughneck working up in the northern Minnesota logging area, among other work too. But recently, or yesterday in fact, due to our bow hunting season opening, I've been spending my time out in the woods. I live on a fairly large plot of land near Eli, Minnesota. But there are a few towns over the population of 2,500 this far north, and neighbours are far and few in between. The terrain is really unforgiving compared to the rest of Minnesota too, and this ties into my story. So, here's what happened. I began by climbing into my non-permanent stand about 2.5 to 3 miles from my house in the state forest adjacent to my property. It was opening morning and all was on par. The sun was barely creeping out when I looked off into the woodlands and spotted something really odd. It was a white-tailed deer, perhaps 40 yards away too. The woods up there are so thick that I could only see the body and the neck, and that's what really confused me the most. It was sickly grey, with pieces of dried matted fur clinging to its bony physique. It looked like a piece of roadkill just standing there. I pulled on my backpack that was hanging off to my left for binoculars to get a closer look, and at this time, I had the urge to look back. For some reason, I felt the back of my head vibrate, like little vibrations or something. I felt a cold sweat work its way across my body, and I looked back and I saw the deer now turned towards me. It was taller than a usual deer too, but physically looked inept, if that makes sense. Now, I also saw its head and antlers too, and worst of all though, was its eyes. Its eyes, even from the distance that I could see, were just milky white, completely off hue from the usual brown or black of deer. Its head was really disproportionate too, favouring its left side with a bulging jaw. The antlers were just really unusual too. Instead of the fresh new transition from velvet to antler, it was a muddy green with an almost pus-coloured flavour to it. I don't know how to explain the feeling that came over me too. I mean, I've been through things that I can't explain. I've seen people that I care about die mere meters away from me. But this is the sole time that I felt truly afraid. I was making eye contact for maybe a minute maximum, blinked, and then this thing was just gone, as if I almost imagined it or something. I still had the overwhelming urge to run too, which eventually I did, and I noticed as soon as I made it down with all my gear that the usual sounds of the forest, they just weren't there. There were no birds, no squeaking of squirrels, not even so much as wind. I mean, the whole forest was just dead silent and still. This all happened yesterday morning, and today I just refused to leave the house regardless of it being my imagination or whatever it could have been. I couldn't sleep whatsoever, and I just had the odd feeling of being watched all night. Any help is appreciated because I need some answers. So, it's the next night now, about 9 PM I'd say, and I went through the regular chores and fed the animals on my small hobby farm. As it began to get darker, I got a shiver and that weird sense of being watched again. I tried letting the dogs out so that they can run and use the bathroom, but both my large pit lab mix and German shepherd, they just refused to go outside. Every time I tried to call them out, they just run off to the other side of the house. I can't help but think that something is actually going on here. I'm not trying to be controversial or start a debate or anything, but I know my wits, myself, and this area. The lady friend is coming over tonight and she wants to talk about it too. Again, I'd just really love everyone's opinion if that would be okay. So, I had a good talk with the girlfriend overnight last night, and I've finally been able to relax a bit. I went to bed thinking things had a logical answer to it, and that I may have just been overreacting. I slept throughout the night, and I'm at work at the moment just updating. Unfortunately though, not all was as perfect as I thought it was. My girlfriend is staying with the dogs until I get home, and sometime after I left, she woke up to hear banging and something going wild outside near the chicken coop. As she walked out once the sun came up, something decently sized got into the coop and just killed every last chicken. I originally thought a fox, but she said that every single chicken was accounted for. None were eaten, they were just killed. I thought that maybe one of the dogs got out, but she was adamant that they were inside our room with her. Funny thing is, I have made sure that the coop was practically impenetrable by foxes or predators, but It looks as if the door was either left open or something unlocked it. This is my story about my close encounter with death and the unknown one fateful night. But let me preface this by saying that Azusa seems to be a hotspot for paranormal activity and witchcraft. There has also been a handful of Bigfoot sightings there too. So, this is the first time that I've shared this story with someone as well, and it all happened fairly recently, just a couple of months ago in fact. I was driving with my buddies up the mountain road that led to our favourite reservoir to fish. It was about 11 PM and there was zero activity on the road, and the night was pretty silent too. Usually, I can hear the crickets and the owls with the occasional coyote calls, but not tonight. I couldn't tell if this was a good or a bad thing, but I must admit that I did feel uneasy for some reason. I mentioned this to my buddy too, who I'll call Bob for now, and Bob said that he was also feeling a little on edge for some reason too. But luckily, he had his carry permit and his 45, so we ignored this tension that's building up and park at the turnoff that leads to the hiking trail. It's about a 2-mile walk to our spot from the turnoff into thick trees and bush. Our trail is well established and the moon is full, so we didn't have a hard time getting to our spot. The whole time though, it was just complete radio silence, except for the sounds of leaves and twigs crushing beneath our feet and being echoed throughout the reservoir. So, our fishing spot is on the side of a mountain with trees to our left, right, and behind us, with the reservoir in front of us and not much space to move. This is relevant to the story because everything went as usual up until about 2:30 in the morning. By this point, we had caught 5 bass between the two of us and were just itching for another bite. And me and Bob were both very silent and focused on feeling the next bite. And that's when we heard a slow and low creaking sound from up the mountain behind us. We looked at each other but shrugged it off, but the sound grew louder and louder until it climaxed with a loud snap. Just as we turned, a large tree about 400 yards behind us and up the mountain begins to fall and slide down the steep mountainside. Along with it, brought some big loose rocks tumbling down too. We start reeling up as fast as we can and run back to the trail to our right and wait for everything to just fall right into the water. The tree got caught on another group of trees about 50 yards from us, and a lot of rocks made it down into the water that we were just fishing in. And holy shit, we could have just fucking died, is what we both said. We were pumped full of adrenaline just trying to cool down too. So, we sat on a rock next to the trail and just breathed for a bit. And that's when we heard a loud and bellowing howl that sounded like nothing I've ever heard or probably ever will hear again. If I had to describe it, it sounded like a depressed middle-aged man letting out all his pain in one long howl, with the force of a lion's roar though. In fact, I could feel the vibration in my chest as it let out this chilling cry. And it just felt like it would never end. But when it did, however, it was followed by the sound of something pushing through the trees and brush, walking deeper into the mountains. Needless to say, we got the fuck out of there in record time. Once we got into the car, we felt safe in our modern steel machine, so we lit up on a dab rig to celebrate being alive and making it back another night. While we did make light of the situation at the time, it was definitely because if we had taken a hard look at what had happened, we would have just shit ourselves. Myself and Bob later came to the conclusion that we might have been around a Sasquatch that had broken a tree to mark its territory or something, and we just happened to have been there. We still fish there to this day, and plenty goes on in Azusa Canyon, from ghosts to Bigfoot and everyday horrors like murder and rape and god-awful stuff. Nowhere is safe, but we'd rather be in nature enjoying ourselves than in the city, and at least we get to pick up poison, right? Back when I was 16, I'm nearly 27 now, I briefly dated a guy named Tyler for what was maybe almost 5 months, I think. We broke up when my mum's job moved us almost 3 states away. We were young and I didn't want to maintain a long-distance relationship while I was trying to adjust to moving from what had been my home of 10 years and starting a new school and all that. We actually stayed casual friends until a mutual told me that he'd actually begun spreading gross rumors that he'd popped my cherry before I left, and after I called to confront him about it, he even admitted to it. I told him that I never wanted anything to do with him again and blocked him on Facebook and his number from my phone and all that, and quite honestly, I didn't even spare him a second thought until 3 years later. So, I just moved into my first apartment with my boyfriend of 2 years and 2 of our friends. I had a job I loved, a great relationship with our roommates, and it was an ideal arrangement for all of us, really. But one night, I opened my Yahoo account, though, for the first time in a little over a year from my desktop, rather than my phone app, and immediately, I had an instant message from Tyler. I had forgotten that back when I used the desktop version frequently, my settings had me automatically logged into the messenger, and I hadn't removed him from my contacts and all that. By now, we were both nearly 21 and I had done a lot of growing up, so I assumed Tyler probably had too and was initially comfortable catching up with him. He'd always been a bit awkward, but I was too, and the conversation was fairly pleasant. Just the usual how have you beens and whatnot, with me doing most of the talking since, in comparison, I'd had more opportunities granted to me where I live now compared to my and Tyler's hometown, where he still lived. Eventually, we signed off since I had work the next day, and while I wouldn't have considered us friends again, I was happy it was civil. But then, he started getting just weird. Eventually, I added him on Facebook, and he would just randomly send me messages about going through my pictures and liking how much I had grown up and what a woman I'd become. At first, I brushed it off as awkward flattery, but then he started talking about the things he wanted to do to me, the sexual things, and I firmly reminded him that I had a serious boyfriend now and how inappropriate his comments were. He would apologize, only to do it all over again the next day, and I got sick of it and blocked him again and told him on Yahoo that if he didn't stop, I'd be contacting the authorities. It was a bluff, meant to hopefully scare him, and it worked for a few hours before he decided to send a message detailing the violent sexual things that he wanted to do to me again. At this point, I was beyond annoyed and disgusted, so I told him that if he ever contacted me again, I would send the screenshots of everything that he'd said to his very Christian mother, who was graciously letting him live rent-free with her. I blocked him on my Yahoo account after that and never heard from him again, assuming that he was just now out of my life. And oh, how I wish that was the end of it. So fast forward a few years, I'm 25, happily married, and my husband and I have just returned to the States after living in Japan for a few years due to his military career. Shortly after we got settled in at our new place, I took a trip to my hometown to spend time with my family and catch up with a few friends. Over coffee, a long-time mutual friend of mine and Tyler's, Amber, divulged to me that Tyler had been cyber-stalking me. Okay, I thought, but that's not really anything serious, right? I mean, I had nothing to hide from anyone, and I was blissfully happy and all, but she started going into detail. So, I had moved 3 times to 2 different states and then to Japan since I'd last spoken to Tyler, and was now living in a 3rd new state. And Amber said that each time I moved, Tyler would suddenly just talk about wanting to attend university in whatever city that I'd moved to. And when I moved to Japan, he claimed to be saving up to vacation there, specifically the area that we were stationed in rather than a place in Tokyo or Okinawa or the other big tourist cities. It was weird to be sure, and Amber told me that she knew Tyler was stalking my Facebook under a fake name. He apparently openly admitted to her, but he would never tell her the name that he used. She was really concerned about his behavior and even admitted that she was only in touch with him because of it. In truth, apparently, he'd become infamous in our circle of mutual friends for just being a creep and sexually harassing several women, successfully chasing all of them off. I felt really uncomfortable with this knowledge too. If her timeline of things were true, then he'd been keeping up with my movements for nearly 6 years now. But what could I do about it? Neither of us knew what name he was using, and if all he was doing was following when and where I moved, I didn't think that there was any harm to it beyond just creeping me out, since he was very unlikely to be able to afford to travel to wherever I was at the time anyway. So I went home and just eventually forgot what Amber had told me, since there really wasn't anything I could do about it anyway. I wasn't receiving any harassing emails or texts, so it was just out of sight, out of mind, right? Months passed and I went to work as usual and life went on. I was a hostess at an upscale local restaurant, and one night a co-worker, a fellow hostess named Gina, said, "Oh hey, you had a friend stop by here yesterday." A friend? I'd moved here nearly a year ago by now, but the only friends that I had were my co-workers. When I asked her who, assuming it was just a regular that I was friendly with or something, I felt my heart stop when she replied, "Tyler." I asked if she was sure, and she vaguely described his appearance, assuring me that she told him that I was off that day and she didn't know when I would work next. Hiding my panic, I claimed to not know anyone named Tyler and that maybe he was looking for a previous employee. My first name is actually really common, and I just excused myself to the bathroom. Sure enough, there was a message from Amber when I opened my phone. She'd apparently come home from work to see a Facebook post, which she screenshot and sent to me, about a friend of hers and Tyler's visiting the city next to where I lived, which is a huge tourist attraction, and Tyler had gone with him. The restaurant I currently worked for only had maybe 7 locations scattered in various areas surrounding the tourism hub, each with a company name and an add-on depending on the specific location in town to make them easy to find. The co-workers I was friends with would tag me as checked in with them on Facebook when we would have drinks together after work and whatnot, and it seemed that Tyler had used them to find out which one I worked at. Terrified now, I spoke to my manager and told him everything that Amber had told me, and that Tyler had apparently showed up looking for me, and blessedly, he let me have the following day off. I still had to finish my shift though. We had no one available who could cover for me to go home, but he gave me tasks that would keep me away from working the front door, and since it was a slow night, Gina let me go home first after I'd filled her in on the situation and all. I immediately called my husband when I clocked out too, and he picked me up rather than letting me walk home like I usually did. Thankfully, my husband had recently decided to switch military branches and would have to go to training for a few months, and we decided that it would be better for both of us if I moved to his hometown to be near our family. I gave my job my 2 weeks' notice the next day, much sooner than planned, mind you, but my manager already knew that I was moving away and understood that I probably wanted to quit now rather than later, given all the situation. It's been 7 months since then, and I'm happily living near my mother-in-law, literally on the opposite side of the country from my hometown and our last location, and have a close-knit little group of friends in our apartment complex, but I did a complete overhaul of my Facebook settings. No one can tag me in any location or picture without my manual approval now, and my current location is unlisted to anyone not on my friend list. Amber still has Tyler on her Facebook, but she says that they rarely speak anymore after he was recently served with a restraining order by a mutual friend of ours. In other words, it seems like I wasn't the only person that he was stalking, and I'm not surprised given the stories of him that had been floating around our old circle of friends for quite some time. I must admit that I still get a little anxious every now and then, especially when I remember how close Tyler came to finding me, but I still don't understand why he's kept track of me for so long, and to be quite honest, I don't think I ever want to know. This story takes place years ago, around 2008 or 2009, I think. I was about 14 years old and going through just a really hard time with my parents and a hard time with early teen years as a whole. I had a room in the basement where I stayed cooped up most of the time, and I had my own computer too. Around this time, Facebook and MSN Messenger chat rooms were pretty popular, and honestly, I don't remember how I started speaking to this guy, but I ended up connecting with a man who told me that he was 35, but that he knew that I was mature enough to know the truth and have adult conversations with. He played with my head a lot, and this only came out after days of chatting too. We continued to chat more and more often too, and he complimented me and made me feel like I was the most amazing person ever. And this escalated to personal details being shared and eventually webcam chats. Now that I'm in my mid-20s, looking back at 14-year-old me, I cannot understand why an adult his age would take such an interest. I was just a kid, plain and simple. But he slowly became lovey, if that's the right word, and would call me pet names and start flirting and all that. Every so often, he would back away and claim that it was wrong, but I would fight and convince him that I was mature for my age and no one needs to know, and blah blah blah. I see now that this was his tactic. He had no intention of just letting me be. In fact, the scheduled webcam times became typical and steady. He made me trust him, and he made me want him and crave his presence. He made me feel better when I was in a turbulent time in my life, and he turned me against my family too, one small step at a time. And eventually, we began saying, I love you to each other, and he wanted to buy me some plane tickets to save me from my parents, as he could take care of me better than they ever could. He told me stories of how things would be, how I could go live in Mexico with him and learn to speak Spanish. All of these just wonderful things, and no one has to know. He could arrange the whole thing, and I just need to be sneaky about it. My heart honestly pounds as I remember how close I came to doing it too. I, honest to God, nearly did. I don't remember exactly how this all ended, but I believe I invited a friend over to webcam with him or something, and she just flipped out about it all. At the time, it seemed so great that I just so happened to fall onto someone so caring and wonderful. I mean, heck, he would have flown me to a tropical paradise straight into his loving arms, right? And I needed love, but now I just get chills thinking of what would have happened. I mean, what kind of adult flirts with a child? Makes these sort of plans with a child? I can't even imagine what his plans were, and if he ended up moving on to someone else. So I'm 18 years old, and I currently live in Egypt. I'm half Egyptian, and I moved here about 2 years ago. So I don't really know how to deal with people in here. And by people, I mean troublemakers. The place I live in is pretty decent, and I actually go to a private school, so I never have to encounter any troublemakers, really. My dad travels a lot, and since I'm the oldest of my siblings, I do most of the shopping, so I always get the groceries and almost everything from big malls. But one day, my hour-long trip just turned into a complete nightmare. So, I drive a pretty good car. Not a sports car or supercar or anything, but a pretty good car for an average youngster in the Middle East. It's an SUV. And about 3 weeks ago, I had a list of groceries to grab, so I went to the mall and did the shopping and paid for it, and I just got out of there. I also decided to try that new vegan burger that I see every day on Facebook, and got one burger, soda, fries, and walked to the parking lot. As I did this, I saw this kid who I thought was maybe 15-ish, and he actually looked pretty homeless to me, so I decided to give him my fries, just to help out and all that. So I dropped the bags on the back seat, and I was even thinking of talking to him, maybe to hear his story or something. I was just really urged to help him after seeing him like that, and I go over to him and shake his hand, and I ask him what he's doing out here, and he said that he was on the way to my village, but lost all of his money. Now, a lot of people have warned me about this scam, but I felt like he was actually in a really bad situation, so I asked a few more questions like, where does he live? Is he in school? What are you doing in the city? I was out of the compound that I lived in at the time, and he said that he was working with someone and he sells stuff on the street and he sold the goods, but he lost his money. I actually felt really horrible for him, so I offered him a ride to the bus station and enough money to get him there. It wasn't much, but it'd be enough for a ticket and maybe a little bit of change. It was almost on my way anyway, only 2 turns away. I didn't feel anxious at all at that point, and I actually told him a bit about my private life. Not really just what I do, but where I live and all that. Before I head out of the mall, though, the security comes and asks me if he's causing any trouble, and I said no, that he was alright. At the time, I actually thought it was pretty disgusting for him to assume that this poor guy was a bad person. But anyway, we head out and I shared my burger with him and even gave him the soda, and he starts guiding me through the road, and it was all fine until he asked me to take a turn to a dirt road. Now, I don't really know where the bus station is, but I knew for sure that it wasn't there. I said that I'll just check it on my phone, and he said alright, and that it's just a short route away, and that's when I started questioning his story in my head. I was relieved that he didn't insist on anything, but still, I was certain that a public bus station would be more public, and he wouldn't be able to do anything, right? So I was still safe. What made me really suspicious, though, was the phone call that he made eventually, where he called someone and said something like, "Hey X, meet me at the one below the bridge, I got the goods." Now, I was like, what the hell is he talking about? I don't see any goods. Before we arrive, I said sorry it's dark, and you can walk there, and I'll drop you on the road right across, and he said yeah, that's alright. I sighed at this and was a little bit relieved, but then he called the guy again and told him that I'll be out on the road and I'm in a white SUV, and at that point, I began to get really anxious. So we arrive, and holy shit, what happened next was not cool. There, right on the road, I see probably 7 guys who were obviously looking for me. Now, it was on a highway, so I thought switching lanes at the last minute would be okay. But as I began to get closer and look around, I also see another huge group of people on the other side. I even noticed that one of them had something that looked like a stick. They spot me and they start waving and shouting, and he says, "Yes, you can drop me here." And I say, "Hell no." I took the middle lane and gassed away, and they were shouting and running after me, and I look at him and say that if he doesn't want me to drop him here, that I can only stop at the police station, which was the complete other way. And he says that that's okay, that I can drop him here. I said okay, but make it fast, and he gets out, but then puts his hand on the handle to try and keep the door open. I change the gear, and I just take a sharp turn to his side, and I adjusted the wheel and just sped the fuck out of there as he let go. I don't know what would have happened if they had caught me that day, if I was going to be mugged, or maybe it was some sort of drug dealer shit. I don't know what the hell was going on, but the whole thing was just so sketchy. So in October, it will be about 3 years since I came alarmingly close to a real-life horror movie. So I took my now ex to the Mahisham cabins in Ohio for our 1-year anniversary. It was beautiful weather, and we were staying in a decked-out treehouse in the middle of the woods. I read great reviews about the place and decided it would be a perfect little getaway for us. We spent the first day just hanging out at the treehouse mostly. We watched movies, sat on the balcony, and did some exploring through the trails and whatnot. I was feeling very content and looking forward to visiting the town the next day too, and the next day we went to a few little shops and restaurants and decided that that night we could go to a bar and watch the baseball since we didn't have cable at the treehouse. I kinda had a bit of a cold at the time, but figured that I'd just stick it out and drink a few beers with my boyfriend so that he could watch his favourite team play. We got to the small bar around 8 or so, and immediately, we just didn't feel very welcome. The bartender was sitting with a group of local guys, and it was clear that they all knew each other, and they were pretty tight. This didn't stop my ex and his ego, though. He walked right up to them and just started ordering drinks for us. He would also get up and make the dudes high-five him every time that something good happened in the baseball game. I tried to escape his cringe-worthy social attempts by downing a few blue moons. To my luck, or so I thought, the bartender kept bringing me beers and telling me to just help myself. I cut him off pretty quick. I'm a lightweight and already wasn't feeling so good anyway. A few more guys came into the bar and my ex started telling one of them how we weren't from around there and we were staying in the tree houses in the Mohitian woods. Suddenly, though, I really started feeling dizzy and just really unwell. I don't know if it was from the cold or from the overwhelming amount of drinks in front of me or something else, but I was ready to go at that point. Also, the bar was starting to empty anyway, and I didn't like the vibe I was getting from the people around us. But once we went outside to the car and started driving, we noticed, though, that something just wasn't right. My ex parked in the Taco Bell across the street from the bar and saw that our tires had been slashed. Well, he starts getting pissed at this point, and I'm barely half awake too, and he tells me that he's going back to the bar to see if anyone has a tire iron he can use since his is bent and just won't work. So, leaving drunk me in the car, he goes back in to find just one man sitting at one of the tables. Before my ex says anything, the man creepily says to him, "A little birdie told me that you have a flat tire." Creeped out by this, but wanting to just get the hell out of there, my ex asks if the dude has a tire iron that he can use to replace at least one tire. The guy says that he has one at his apartment right around the corner and has my ex follow him there. When we got to this guy's apartment, suddenly he became aware that this just wasn't feeling right. This guy's apartment was just full of those big plastic barrels used to store hazardous waste, and there were just stacks of paper and boxes just everywhere. The creepy dude is taking his good old time too, and saying that he just needs to look a few places for the tire iron. Finally, though, it clicks in my ex's head that he was lured away from the car that I was now sleeping in. He tells the creep to forget the tire iron and just runs back to the car, and he turns the car on and drives back to our place on basically his rims, going as fast as he can. There are no streetlights, mind you, but basically no one else around too, and we're driving at like 3 a.m. up a dark road hoping the car makes it. But once we get back, we realize that some of these creepy people there know where we're staying now, and they could easily find us too. Needless to say, we stayed up through the night with a hatchet next to us, and the first thing we did in the morning is we called to have our tires changed, and we just got the fuck out of there. I don't know what would have happened if my ex hadn't have reached the car sooner, but my mind is telling me that these guys planned to keep him away from me as long as they could for God knows what reason. Also, I don't know why the hell this guy's apartment was filled with these just plastic drums, but it was creepy. I also want to mention that everyone else we met in that town was super nice and welcoming, and don't let this story discourage you from checking the place out if you want to. On the other hand, those creepy locals from the corner bar, I sure hope that you never run into them like we did. True crime was and is one of my favorite genres of entertainment. I love reading about serial killers and stalkers and things like that because none of it had ever touched my life personally. But since this happened, it's become much less rooted in fantasy, and I'm now looking out for red flags everywhere. So, during my sophomore year in college, I was a volunteer teaching assistant for an on-campus international student program in the Northeast. So basically, it was the last step students had to take to get a certificate telling potential schools and employers that I can speak English really well, and here's proof. The students tended to come in groups selected by programs in their home countries. So, one semester we might have a lot of Chinese and Brazilian students, and the next we'd have Koreans and Saudi Arabians, and this particular semester, there were a lot of people from Mexico, and they all lived in an off-campus housing complex called the Suites. Now, my position, as I've said, was just as a volunteer. I'd had some friends from the program in the past, and they knew I wanted to teach English abroad, so they put in a good word for me with the staff so that I could get some practical skills and experience under my belt and all that. Being an informal arrangement as it was, I had no qualms about forming personal relationships with the students. In fact, a few of us are still good friends today. I wasn't a very outgoing person at the time, and though I had many friends, I hardly ever drank, and I've never really been to a party per se. Hearing this, the Mexican students who threw parties just about every weekend insisted that I come to the next one. I have to admit that the party, it was really fun. It was comprised of, almost exclusively, international students, which was nice because I actually knew most of them. I actually got really drunk too, and had fluent conversations in languages that I had very loose grasps on. And everything was just going great, until a few of us retreated into a friend's dorm for some air. Checking their phones, a few girls realized that Pamela had not returned from Main Street yet, and no one could get a hold of her. Pamela was a 19-year-old Mexican student and had gone to a local eatery after lessons that day in order to meet one of the teachers for a private tutoring session. But the session was scheduled for 5 p.m. and should not have gone longer than 7:30, and it was 11:30 at this point, and the girls were understandably worried. I asked which teacher the tutoring session was with, and they told me that it was Charles. And immediately, my skin crawled. There were about 5 teachers at the facility, and Charles was by far the sketchiest. He was around 40 years old, half Japanese-American, with short but visibly flat-ironed black hair that partially covered his glasses. He honestly just looked like a stereotypical weirdo. So, I tried to hop around between classrooms on a weekly basis to get a feel for different teaching methods, but I cut my week with Charles short because he was just so creepy. The way that he spoke to his students was condescending and mildly inappropriate, commenting on a girl's blouse or telling risque stories about his own wild college years and how they ought to take a page from his book. All of this in the middle of class, mind you. Additionally, he would always get uncomfortably close to the Latina students, grabbing their shoulders, touching the smalls of their backs, and even gazing at their breasts occasionally. Honestly, he'd never done anything too bad, but he just creeped me and everyone else the fuck out. And so, after sharing some creepy Charles stories, we were all pretty freaked out and ready to do something. The last anyone had heard from Pam was at 5:15 when she texted and said that her phone was going to die, but she would figure out a way home when the tutoring session was over. It was the middle of winter in the northeastern US, and a blizzard warning was in effect too. The dinner she was at was a 3-mile walk from the suites, and a few girls suggested that she was bunkering down until the warning let up. The problem was, that could be days. Another theory was that she got lost trying to find her way home in the snow. None of us had a car, so we told a few of the boys and they formed a search party and started walking toward Main Street. But just a few minutes later, they returned with a snow-covered Pamela in their midst. Being from Mexico, none of these people had properly packed for a brutal winter, so when they found her, she was absolutely freezing and soaked to the bone. So, after a hot shower and relaxing for a bit, she told us in Spanish what had happened. When she arrived at the diner, Charles was nowhere to be found. She waited 40 minutes and was about to start walking back, knowing a storm was coming, when he finally showed up. He apologized and said that he was just upstairs and had dozed off. He lived in the upstairs apartment, you see, and asked if she would mind taking the lesson up there, as it was a lot more quiet. Being a shy and somewhat reserved person who spoke little English, she just complied. When upstairs, he started asking all sorts of questions about herself. Most she could barely answer, and when she stumbled, he would laugh and chastise her for her mistakes. He tutored her for about an hour and then made them both dinner too. It was 7 p.m. by now, and Pam wanted to leave, but he told her to eat and that he would drive her home afterward. It was pitch black, mind you, and the storm was picking up considerably at this point. He told her that a girl like you shouldn't be walking home alone at night. Pam was nervous, but she knew that he was right too, and she wasn't confident that she'd even be able to find her way home in all this snow. So she stayed. When they finished eating, Pamela went for the door, but he stopped her and asked if she would do him a favor. He went into his bedroom and beckoned for her to follow, and hesitant as she was, she peeked into the room and saw a full photo studio set up against the wall facing the bed. He told her to stand in front of the light so that he could take a few photos and then he'd take her home. Frightened and confused in a country that she was very unfamiliar with a man that she thought she could trust, she did as she was told, and after a few minutes, the request got darker though. He showed her pictures of other girls, mostly college-age Latinas, who he had taken pictures of in various positions and states of undress, and asked her if she would do some of these poses too. She said no, that she didn't want to undress, so he pulled a pair of boxer shorts and a tank top out of his top drawer and tossed them at her. He said, "Put these on then, just a few pictures and then we'll go, I promise." So she went into the bathroom to change into the clothes that he'd given her, and she just sat there, cursing at her phone and on the brink of tears. For 5 and 10 and then 15 minutes, she couldn't remember how long she sat there until she just heard knocking on the door. He said, "Pamela, come on, I was just kidding. Come out of there and I'll take you home now." Not completely trusting him, but knowing that there was no other way out of this situation, she exited the bathroom. He apologized for making her feel uncomfortable and offered to drive her home, at which point she grabbed her things and said that she was fine walking and just left. He didn't go after her too, and he didn't try to stop her. But she did, in fact, end up getting lost too, and walked around town for over an hour before the boys found her a few blocks from the complex. We urged her to tell this story to the police, but they said technically that no crime was committed, so she told the head of the program. Interestingly enough, he accepted it a little too easy, as if he expected it, and we later found out that this was apparently not the first time something like this had happened. We already knew it wasn't because he had pictures of other girls too, but an especially ugly story found its way to us. So apparently, the previous year, a South American girl was really struggling in class and received tutoring from Charles. After 2 or 3 sessions, she just stopped going despite her grades not improving. She became exceedingly closed off too and just stopped going out altogether, often missing class. After a few weeks, she just dropped out of the program and flew back home. No one knew her well enough to ask why, but they all had a sneaking suspicion that it was because of Charles. And after hearing Pamela's experience, the program just immediately dropped Charles as a teacher, which just proves that this was not the first complaint against him. This last bit may also just be a rumor, but I heard from a pretty solid source that after Pamela filed the complaint, the police checked him out, and Charles apparently wasn't even his real name. Turns out, he'd been using fake information to get teaching gigs around the country for the past 5 to 10 years, as he was actually a registered sex offender. He's probably in jail right now, but I'm not too sure because after this, Charles just disappeared. So firstly, I'm going to tell you guys about the story of what happened to me, and then after that, I'll explain the info that I found out later that revealed all the creepy stuff. So, this was in 2005, and I was living in Missoula, Montana. I was 10 years old, my 7-year-old sister and I shared a bed, and my best friend was also over this night having a sleepover. We were all in my big bed, which was up against a window, and if you looked out the window, you would be at eye level with the ground. In front of you would be just the backyard, and up and to the left you would see the deck that went up to the stairs level and led to the kitchen. Anyways, this night in like February or March I think, it was still cold and kind of snowy. The 3 of us were having a giggly sleepover in our bed, and I looked out the window for a split second and I saw a deer on the deck. I showed my sister and friend, and we didn't think much of it, but about an hour passed, and we were finally ready to go to sleep, and I looked out again and saw the deer still on the deck. But this time, it had two green lights, or iridescent-looking things. I pointed it out to my sister and friend, and they saw it too, and all of a sudden it moved, and it was very clearly not a deer. It was definitely a person, but all we could see was the silhouette, and it looked like they were facing our kitchen door window or something. We kept watching the person, and all of a sudden, they started moving towards the deck stairs, toward us. He got to the bottom of the stairs and stopped, probably looking at us, and just stood there for a few seconds. He must have been 6 feet away from the window, and it freaked us out, and we all started screaming, and he clearly heard us and just ran out of our backyard. My dad, he actually went out with his gun and called the cops, and there was nothing. And so, that was the experience. But here's the context. I didn't know this because I was young and my parents didn't say anything at the time, but during this time, all the neighbors got a notice from the local PD saying that they had information leading them to believe that a wanted killer and child molester was in the neighborhood, or at least in the area, and just to keep an eye out. I believe later that they actually released the name of this individual to be Joseph Duncan. It was like the talk of the town for sure for a long time. My parents didn't tell us this explicitly, but during this time, we weren't allowed outside alone, and we weren't allowed to go to the park down the street and all that stuff. So, about a month and a half later too, in Idaho, a little girl named Shasta and her brother Dylan were kidnapped, and their entire family inside the house was killed with a hammer by a man named Joseph E. Duncan. What's crazy is that he actually snuck into their home in the middle of the night after scouting out their home once or twice. And he could have very well done the same to my family that night, or possibly another night. He did just horrible and unspeakable things to the children, and eventually killed the little boy too. He tortured that poor little girl until they were found in a Denny's. My dad and I actually watched the report moments after it happened in a hotel room on vacation. My family was all over this because we totally believed that that man was the one at our house that night. But one more kicker. So, apparently, he used night vision goggles to scope out houses of potential victims. And what did I see on that deer? Green iridescent lights, or the reflections of the night vision goggles. I am totally convinced that that night when I saw the deer, that I actually saw Joseph E. Duncan getting ready to take his next victims. Us. To start off, this happened in high school around 2014 or 2015, I'd say. I was in 10th grade, and my friends and I thought it would be funny. But looking back on my life, this is probably one of the dumbest things I've done, though, to get a Ouija board and just mess around with it. It was a bad idea, I know, and it was also very typical of a bunch of stupid 15-year-olds who were just beginning to learn about witchcraft and all that. Anyway, I did a little research, if that's what you want to call it. I just looked up to the do's and don'ts, but we bought a Ouija board from Target. Honestly, this story gets more stereotypical as we go. And we messed around with it in my friend, we'll call her M's backyard. All I can say is, thank God that we didn't do it in the house. At first, only Em and I used the Ouija board, and for the most part, we were just kind of fucking around, just trying to spook each other, but I was genuinely curious after a while, and we started to try and use it properly. We talked to a few spirits, nothing bad happened, and we thought that it was pretty cool. About a week later, Em told me that she got her own Ouija board. It was from someone's yard sale or something, and me being the only one of our friends from our friend group who bothered to actually look up Ouija board experience online, my reaction was kind of like, this isn't good. I was a little concerned that something might be attached to it because I had read about not using a Ouija board with a previous owner, but eventually we got bored at her house and went outside to use it. Our friend also came over. I'll address her by the name of E, and she had never used a Ouija board before, so I told her the big no-nos of using a Ouija board and we got started. We were also on Skype with another one of our friends because he wanted to watch us use it. And immediately after a few yes and no questions, my friend got the hang of it and we asked for the spirit's name. And it spelled out M-A-M-A. And E immediately noped the fuck out of there because she had read some dumb legend online about the demon that goes by that name. She took her hands off, and honestly, I could have strangled her right there and then because I knew that she had broken a rule by doing that. I know that you really don't know who you're communicating with the Ouija board, but I wasn't too scared yet, but she had definitely broken a rule, and I thought it was sketchy to kind of keep going at this point. In fact, I was about to say goodbye with them, and immediately the planchette moved in an infinity sign around the board. My stomach dropped, and I felt some sort of weird tingling or presence, if that's the right word, which is the first time that I'd ever felt anything like that. We had to force the planchette to say goodbye because whatever the fuck that was didn't want to say goodbye, and I threw the planchette out into the yard. At this point, we had forgotten all about the Skype call, and my phone was even off at this point. But it was fully charged, and when I turned it back on, a friend told me that it had actually disconnected and made a bunch of weird noises. And that kind of spooked me out a bit. I told Em and E that we were going to get rid of the fucking thing, and Em got very irrationally angry, and looking back on it, I didn't think much of it because she has a few mental illnesses as it is, and I figured that was probably it, but now I kind of think maybe it was something else. Em and I fought over the board. I wanted it gone, and she wanted to keep using it. And he snatched it from Em and said, "I'm getting rid of it. Look what it's doing to you guys." And we kind of calmed down a bit after this. She tore it up. It was a cardboard one, and walked to the river behind Em's place and just threw it in, and all three of us vowed to not touch one ever again. So fast forward to a few months later, after Christmas break, and I went to Em's house to sleep over for the weekend. And she brought out this big-ass wooden Ouija board. Her brother had gotten her another one dated back to the 1950s because he thought it was really cool and knew that she was into that stuff. You know that legend that says if you don't get rid of a board properly that it comes back? Well, yeah, it seemed like it came back alright, and 10 times worse this time too. I refused to even touch that board because I knew it was a bad idea, and I did not want to feel the feeling that I got from the last time we used it. I just got this feeling that's hard to explain, and I knew that I shouldn't touch it. But my instincts proved me right in the end too, and reluctantly, I went outside with her, and this was the first time that she had used it because she wanted me to use it with her, but I still refused, and I told her that I would watch, but she couldn't pay me money to touch the damn thing. But my instincts were just screaming at me that this was just all going to go wrong. And of course, it did. So, immediately, the board spelt out M-A-M-A. I tried to tell Em to stop using it, but it was like she didn't even hear me. And it scared me even more this time because my hands weren't on it. It was all her, and she was so focused on it. Almost like she was in some sort of a trance or something. After a few yes or no questions, and me becoming more on edge by the second, her hand on the planchette started moving around faster, and then I couldn't keep up with it, and Em just looked up and said, "She wants me to leave her an offering." I ripped her hands off from the board at this point, and I told her that that was enough, and that was a terrible idea, and she snapped out of whatever had her glued to that board and said, "Yeah, you're probably right." We went back upstairs and put the Ouija board in her closet, and Em went downstairs to grab a snack when I was using the bathroom, and when I came out of the bathroom, she was sitting on her bed with the Ouija board again, and her hands were moving like they were before. And At that point, I got that really strange feeling again. She just looked up at me like everything was normal too, and I took the board from her again and tried to talk some fucking sense into her, and I shut it in the closet and left the light in the closet on. I turned on all the lights in her room because at that point, I have to admit that I was absolutely terrified. But things died down until my friend, who had literally no idea about the Ouija board, texted me with some screenshots of Em threatening to sacrifice him for the blood moon. I asked Em about this because it was just totally weird and just so out of character for her, and she picked up her phone and looked through the text she'd sent, and she looked up at me with genuine fear in her eyes. Some small part of myself still wanted to think that this was all her just fucking with me, or something rational sounding, but the look on her face confirmed it. Something was just very wrong. And then we heard a thud in the closet. We immediately looked towards the closet, and we could see something moving in there from the shadow on the floor. And then the light on the closet just went off. The switch was on the outside, and the switch was still on though. Em was terrified, and so was I. The lights in her room were flickering, and we looked at each other to confirm that we had both just seen that. At this point, it was around midnight, and things just began to get worse too. She tried to go to sleep, but there was no way that I was going to get any sleep that night. She slept for maybe 15 minutes and woke up because she said that her leg hurt. And we looked at her leg, and there was this huge claw-looking mark there. We heard something banging around on the roof too, and the house just made these awful noises. And the whole time I just had this feeling that I still can't explain to this day. It was the dreadful feeling like before, but just way worse. I genuinely thought that I was going to die that night, in fact, especially after we saw something move in the corner of the room. Em eventually got so tired that she fell asleep, leaving me to deal with the noises that sounded straight out of a fucking horror movie. But the worst part was probably that feeling. It was just so odd, and it felt so disturbing, and I really thought that I was going to die that night. Strangely enough, though, Em eventually woke up in the morning with just absolutely no recollection of that night's events. And apparently, she had a dream about a spirit leaving her body. And that was all she remembered. To this day, I firmly believe that something was happening that night, and something was trying to get my friend. And whatever it was either something demonic or just something extremely negative. I'll never forget the feeling that I had that night too, not for the rest of my life, and it just honestly shook my beliefs to the core. And yes, we threw the Ouija board into the river that morning, but the strange things happened in her house for a long time after that whole incident. At the time of this story, it was the summer after junior year, and a couple of my buddies and I were at someone's house doing the usual things teenagers do. After a couple of hours of Xbox and basketball, one of my friends, Sam, rolled up with a trunk full of fireworks, and we decided that it would be fun to go set them off at an empty field a mile away from the house. As we all piled into Sam's car and started driving out of the neighborhood, a man stepped onto the road and blocked our way. He was huge too, and covered in tats. Probably 6'3" or so, I'd say, with a long dark hair pulled back in a ratty ponytail. Sam honked the horn as the man just stood in front of our car yelling obscenities at us. When finally, my friend has had enough and whipped the car around him while flipping the guy the bird, speeding out of the neighborhood and towards the main road. A couple of minutes later, and we got to the field and set up the fireworks. As we all hid around the edges of the grass, Sam stepped forward and lit the firework up. Seconds later, the firework ignited and exploded, much louder than any of us had expected, in fact. It was so loud, in fact, that I ran back to Sam's car with him, and he slammed on the gas and flew out of the parking lot onto the main road. As we neared the entrance to my friend's neighborhood, it dawned on Sam that he had left the rest of the guys back at the field. So he stopped the car and made me get out so that he could go retrieve the other guys. I didn't understand why I couldn't go with him, but it didn't matter. It was a nice summer night anyway, and I sat down on the sidewalk near the entrance of the neighborhood and just pulled out my phone. After a couple of minutes of phone games, it died in my hands, and I thought, shit. And I just sat back and enjoyed the weather, waiting for the headlights to come back down the road when I heard a slight noise behind me. I turned my head, expecting to see a bird or wind-blown branches or something, but the streetlight outlined the figure of a man. The man from earlier, in fact. He had crept up behind me while I was sitting there, and he locked eyes with me, and I was immediately struck by the wild look in them. Like he was both looking at me and looking through me at the same time or something. I got up and backed away slowly, and then turned and started walking away from him. He kept pace with me, though, and began to yell at me, "Hey you, get the fuck back here." I increased my pace, and he continued to match it, screaming at me the entire way, and eventually I was full out sprinting away from him, and I heard him slow down. I tore down the sidewalk back to the parking lot of the field and was reunited with my friends before relaying the story to them as well. As we drove back, we searched the area for him, but he was nowhere to be found. It dawned on me, though, that if my phone hadn't have died, I probably would not have noticed the footsteps of the man and probably would have not had such a fortunate outcome in the end. I don't know what his problem was or what he was going to try to do to me if he actually got a hold of me, but man, am I glad that my phone died that night. So my husband, kid, and I, we live out in the middle of nowhere on a plot of land that's about 100 acres, I'd say. There's probably about 95 of those acres that are wilderness with just ATV and hiking trails that we and several of the other previous owners created by exploring. We use that land for camping and hiking and hunting, and we'd like to find a spot, just clear it a bit and camp overnight with not much else with us. There's so much space that we've never stayed in the same place twice, in fact. We've seen some kill sites, both old and fresh, lots of animal tracks, places where deer bed down, etc. And I've even spent a lot of time hiking solo while the kids are in school and husband's at work and whatnot. Whether alone or with family, we always carry a firearm for protection, though. A few weeks ago, we decided to load up on some camping gear and start a new trail. We marked the trails that we make with spray paint on trees. We were pretty far in the woods, having hiked almost an hour now, when the atmosphere just seemed to change. I don't know who noticed it at first, but my husband, who was leading the three of us, turned around and gave me a concerned look. The birds had stopped chirping at this point, and the insects, they had gone quiet. There were just absolutely no sounds around us at all. And when in the woods, complete quietness is rarely a good thing. We continued onward, though, hyper-aware of our surroundings while our kids continued merely talking. We came to the stream that marks the midway point of our property, and we stopped for a few minutes. And my husband and I, we just kind of stare each other down. We both just felt like something was off, but didn't want to scare our daughter. Eventually, I finally broke the silence and said I suddenly didn't feel good and we should just go home. My husband nodded in agreement while our daughter voiced her protest, but too bad, kiddo. We turned around and we started back. After going a few hundred yards, still in the silent wilderness, mind you, I looked to my right and I saw a person crouched down in a ghillie suit about 150 feet off the trail. I'm positive that they saw that I noticed them too, but they never moved. I cleared my throat to get my husband's attention, and when he looked back, I put my hand on the gun in my holster on my hip, which caused him to readjust his rifle in preparation of anything. I sped up my family and we hurried back home, and I told my husband as soon as we were inside. We decided to call the police and report the trespasser, and filed a report and was told to call again if we saw anyone. A few days later, my husband and I went out alone and set up a bunch of deer cams. We didn't go back out into the woods for maybe a week, and then he and I ventured out to retrieve the cam footage. Out of the 9 cams that we placed, We caught a person in a ghillie suit in 2 images. We handed copies over to the cops to go with our report, and we haven't gone back out since except to check the deer cams. We haven't gotten any other trespassers pretty much ever, and it freaks me out even more to think of the few times while camping that we actually heard walking near our tent in the middle of the night. We always assumed that it was just curious animals, but now I'm not so sure anymore. So, before I tell this, I think I need to give some quick background info that seems relatively important to the story. So, it's 2003 and I'm 6 years old. At the time, I lived in a small condo, 1 bedroom, 1 bath and a connected living room and kitchen with an island in between and a spiral staircase with random miscellaneous things stored under it. I was living with my dad with a mother who was out of the picture. It was Saturday, and I remember specifically watching Codename Kids Next Door on TV in the bedroom after waking up. My dad, he worked a lot of the time, but he was such a nice guy that he left the TV on Cartoon Network for me, which he knew was my favourite channel. During a commercial break, I got up to take a piss, and even though I knew I was home alone, I closed the door out of instinct. And boy, am I glad about that. The next thing that I comprehended was the sound of my incredibly noisy spiral stairs. They can be heard literally across the condo because of how small it is, and they just began to rapidly make noise that got quieter over the course of about 2 seconds, and telling me that whatever made the noise was going downstairs, and fast. As a 6-year-old, this was extremely concerning because, as I said, my dad always turned the TV on before he left for work, and I knew that he was long gone at this point. So, what did I do? Well, as any paranoid 6-year-old would do when they think that they've imagined it, I walked out of the bathroom and looked over the 3-foot-long railing across from the bathroom door and next to where you would walk down the stairs. Kind of confusing, I know, but just try to visual it, I guess, if you want. And what did I see? None other than an afraid-looking man looking into my living room, but staying hidden under the stairs. After being terrified in the bathroom, I made a distinct effort to be quiet, like a spy, I was thinking. So there was no way that he knew that I was looking at him, but more than likely, practically guaranteed in fact, knew that I was in the house somewhere. Okay, so there is a man in the house, and I can A, yell at him to leave and maybe be murdered, raped, or beaten or something. By the way, there was no exit upstairs, only a balcony with a screen door that was jammed for years, and even if I somehow got it unstuck, it's like a 15-foot drop that would be no good anyway, so the only exit in the house is the front door. It's a fire hazard, I know. Or there was option B, hide. I opted for option B, obviously. I waited for what felt like hours, but in reality was probably only about 20 minutes until I heard shuffling downstairs for about a minute. Then, the sound that I was praying for, the front door opening. I was still extremely skeptical, even thinking that it was a trap to lure me downstairs, so I stayed put upstairs. All day, in view of the TV, by the way, until my dad came home, who I didn't tell about the whole incident out of fear that I shouldn't have had, thinking that he would be mad that I didn't approach him or something. Nothing valuable was missing from the house, but you're sure as hell that I checked under those stairs every morning when I walked down them for the next 3.5 years of living in that condo. So, why was he there? I have no idea. How was he there? I have a pretty reasonable theory that, simply put, my dad forgot to lock the door behind him after he left, and this man was trying doors for some reason, and he came in and hid upstairs somewhere to do something, but got cold feet because I was a little kid. But other than that, I have no idea. All I can say is that, man, am I glad that I had that bathroom door shut, because if he had seen me directly, who knows what could have happened. Back in 2013, I was living with my ex at the time, who lived near a nice country village, and as I was in between jobs at the time, I picked up a job at a local garden centre. It was casual retail work, fairly decent pay, and easygoing enough that I could take a coffee break frequently and wear basically whatever I liked as long as I wore my work polo shirt. It was walking distance from my ex's house and full of people of all ages who were the most lovely people that I've ever met. Most of the regular customers who came to the garden centre, they were usually sweet old people who would visit the cafe because we had free tea and discounted lunches for the OAPs if they had a store card. So, you often got to know all of them, and some of them we even gave nicknames. Most of them were pretty sweet, like Pink Hair Lady. She was a badass 80-year-old grandma who wore a tasseled leather jacket and bright pink hair. But then there was Camper Van Couple, who used to drive a really cool camper van with bright orange flowers painted on it. You get the idea. But with Creepy Artist Man, though, he gave most of the young girls there weird vibes. He wore a straw hat, was in his late 40s I'd say, had round gold-rimmed glasses, and would wear strange graphic shirts with naked women on them, or pro-sessional pussy patrol sort of slogans on the back and stuff. He always wore ripped jeans where his knees were always hanging out of them, which were always dirty and painted or mud or something. He had this weird half smile too that would never leave his face, and kind of a leer that made people feel uncomfortable. He would take off his glasses and clean them constantly, which kind of made you feel like he was trying to get a better look at the girls who worked there or something. Especially the younger ones, 16-plus school leavers usually. Anyway, it was a roasting hot summer's day, and I had gratefully accepted the job of watering the hanging baskets outside, where I could avoid the humid, sweaty heat of the greenhouses. I was wearing black shorts and my red polo and my tool belt to prune and deadhead the plants as I went. With the hose in my hand and sunnies on my face, I was busy but enjoying the solitary job at the quietest part of the garden centre. And then I heard, well, hello there. Out of practically nowhere too, he slipped out behind some wooden trellises and looked me up and down, smiling with this weird, too small teeth. His eyes lingered on me for what felt like an uncomfortable few seconds, and I turned off my hose and asked him if he needed anything. He shook his head and kind of shrugged, still smirking at my legs too. I said to him, "Okay, sir, have a nice day. Let me know if you need anything," and I turned to continue. He says, "I've never seen you here before. You're a new one, right?" I say, "Huh, me? Well, I've been here for 8 months now." He says, "I must have missed the memo that a beauty like you started here. You have a nice tan. You look young." I say, "Thanks, I'm 23. Anyways, I have to go back to work." And he says, "Nice to meet you," and quotes my name. I suddenly remember my name badge, and I get slightly irritated that he now knew my full name. I make a beeline for the smoking area where the tool shed was with an excuse to grab some smaller gardening gloves, and by the time I returned to the floor, he had left, thankfully. As the weeks went by, he would come into the store regularly, usually mid-afternoon I'd say, coincidentally, or so I thought, around the time that I started my shift. But most of the time, I was the only cashier, so I would have to serve him. He would buy the most just smallest pointless things like florist wire or a tiny bag of birdseed, and it seemed like he would purposely make a purchase with the intention of interacting with me. He would make comments about my appearance, statements mostly like, "You have your hair different today, yesterday you had it down, you have new glasses," or "That's a different lip color to yesterday." He would always announce my name loudly and deliberately during every interaction too, and I felt really uncomfortable, but I was 23 and I kind of just politely shrugged it off at the time. Around Christmas time, I was decorating the artificial trees, and he cornered me in the forest of them at the back of the store. He jumped out from behind one, and he actually made me jump, to which I was kind of pissed about him doing because I dropped a glass ornament and it had smashed. He bent down also and tried to help, grabbing my wrist and telling me not to touch the glass. His grip was actually scarily tight and forceful, and his hands were clammy and gross too. I slipped my hand out of his grip and asked if I could help him with anything, and that's when it got weird. He pulled out a leaflet from his back pocket and told me that he was an artist and had a Christmas art show happening in the local church hall, and he wanted me to go with him. He told me that he was a painter and thought that I would like his work. I had never indicated that I was interested in art, to him or anyone else for that matter, which is why I thought it was strange. I asked him if he wanted to pin the leaflet to the local event board, and he reached out and touched my arm and said no, that the invitation is specifically for you. He pointed his finger and jabbed it to my breast, and then he said, "You." So, I'm standing there in a dark corner, obscured from view by artificial Christmas trees, just kind of cornered by this guy who was touching me at this point. I kind of just cringed away and said I was busy with my boyfriend that day, sorry, and kind of just scampered off at that point. I remember feeling really strange after that, though. The fact that he grabbed my wrist and jabbed his finger into my chest that way. I told a few of my colleagues about it, and they told me that they would warn me next time he was in the store so that I could maybe hang out in the storeroom until he was gone. Well, that memo must have been missed by a few of the temp Christmas staff, because one day I get told by one, "Your friend is asking for you at the tills." It wasn't totally unusual for my friends to stop by, as it was a fairly popular for gift store, so thinking it was maybe my ex's mum or something, I head to the till, and there he is. And he's holding a piece of paper. I cringe, but he had seen me now, so I walk over and ask what he needed from me. He passed the paper over and asked me to open it. Folded up was a drawing of me with exaggerated breasts and cartoon-like eyes, watering with hanging baskets in a sexual kind of position. I kind of stood there and I said thank you out of just a knee-jerk response, but I couldn't keep it as I thought it was inappropriate to take gifts from customers and all. I handed it back to him and he kind of looked at me with this angry stare. He turned around and walked out just without another word. By this point, I had had enough, to be honest, and I knocked on my manager's door and told him about the whole scenario that had just happened and all the previous interactions that I'd had with him over the past year. He watched the CCTV and agreed that it was really strange that he gave me this gross picture, and told me that he could talk to him if he came back. He praised me for my reaction to his advances and said that I was doing the right thing and he would try and see him off next time if there was a next time. So the next day was Sunday and I wasn't due to work. My boss calls me and tells me that he just received a call from HQ stating that an anonymous caller had called in to report a staff member inappropriately coming onto a customer. The staff member that they described and named was me. The caller had said that I had been inappropriate towards him at work, offered to have sex with him, had led him on, and obviously was promiscuous, and that I had been pursuing him for over a year now. The jerk even described a fictitious relationship we had had and ranted loudly about how I'd been cheating on my boyfriend before hanging up. HQ luckily didn't believe a word, as my manager had already mentioned the guy to one of the higher-ups, but they thought it was wise to let me know about this crazy guy and suggest that I report it to the police at this point. The next day, I did just that. The officer I spoke to said that he actually matched the description of a man who was just a local pest, somebody who would often harass young girls in the local area, and he was also known to stalk girls in his car and had even attempted to abduct a young girl 4 years ago. Holy shit, right? The police officers assured me that they would file the report and talk to him officially, and that he was not allowed in the garden centre or anywhere near me again, and if he did, I was to call the police and he would actually be arrested. Unfortunately, though, it never stopped him sending a ranting letter to my workplace, addressed to me, saying that he was going to end himself if I didn't take him back and receive his gift that he drew of me. Fortunately, the police saw this as unsolicited contact, and he was thankfully arrested, I don't know where he is and whatever happened to him, but the fact that he actually tried to abduct a young girl 4 years ago is creepy, to say the least. My mother and father had been separated since I was about 1 or 2 years old, I'd say, and I visited my father occasionally during the summers while I lived with my mother. But for some reason, my mum believed that it was a great idea to send me to my father's this summer. And this, despite at the time, he didn't even have an official place to stay because he had gotten kicked out of his home a few weeks after I'd gotten there. And so, he resorted to staying with a friend that he had met at a past homeless shelter, Pete. Now, Pete's home on the surface looked decent, and even though he seemed odd, nothing rang any real bells, and he seemed pretty much okay. The first night that I knew something was wrong, though, is when I fell asleep in his bed. That night, I woke up with bedbug bites just all over me. I mean, they were just literally everywhere. When I first complained to my dad about the bites too, Pete was a bit upset and said, "My bed don't got any bedbugs, you must have bought them in." And he was just in absolute denial at that point. Another side note, my dad left for work, leaving me alone with Pete for 8 to 12 hours a day sometimes. After a few days of being there, I started to get more restless too, because Pete would sometimes make suggestive comments toward me that he had sexual implications, or would just refuse to let me eat anything until my dad came home. For many of those wondering why I didn't tell my dad was, well, because I assumed that if we didn't stay here, that he would end up living on the streets, and I'd rather deal with this asshole than live in a cardboard box, right? However, one day, I was a bit more talkative than usual. Mind you, at this time I hadn't slept for around 21 hours and hadn't ate for half that time. I was exhausted, but the bedbug bites constantly made me itchy, and I couldn't sleep, and I just had to talk. I don't remember completely how it even got to this point, but all I can remember is that I was in the bathroom. So, at some stage, I think I possibly told Pete that I was just fed up with him and would tell my dad. And as I closed the door behind me, he suddenly came charging in like a bull. I tried locking the door, but he wouldn't let me close it. A 12-year-old versus a grown man? I didn't stand a chance strength-wise. Now, my mum constantly trained and drilled into my head that adults, they can be dangerous. That you should never get into someone's car, and, in her own words, if they got you in the car, play along and then grab the steering wheel and try and crash the car. It's better to die than have them get you to the second location. And no matter what, even if you have to risk your life, never let them get power or take you into that second location. I remember going into instinct mode, and I grabbed the razor that he left on his sink, and Pete was screaming things like, "I'll kill you," and just other shit like that mixed in with just swear words. I remember I stupidly dropped my phone near the toilet, but opened the door and slipped beneath Pete's arms. I sprinted for the door, and he caught me and slammed me into the wall. I remember slicing his arm with a razor when he tried to strangle me, and getting up and just running outside of his house. He wasn't able to catch me at that point, and then I made another stupid mistake. Some old guy beneath our floor kind of knew my dad and offered me to stay at his house and wait for him to get home. Guys, I know that this was dumb to accept, but I was tired and hungry and just wasn't thinking straight. When he had made me a sandwich and gave me a blanket to sleep on his couch, I was thinking, what if he poisoned this food, or was going to try and rape me when I fell asleep, or something? Imagine, a 12-year-old thinking about all of this already. What a world we live in, right? The next thing I knew, I fell asleep with the razor clutched into my hands. Yeah, I fell asleep in this man's house who I didn't even know. I couldn't even call my dad because my phone had fallen somewhere in his house during all the scuffle and everything. But eventually, my dad got home and immediately threatened Pete, grabbed our things, and we went to a motel until I was able to go back to my mother's place. Needless to say, that was the worst summer of my entire life. This is a story that I tell pretty frequently, actually, to friends, but to this day, I still haven't told either of my parents. I'm 23 now, and this must have happened when I was 11 or 12, I'd say, because I was still in middle school at this time. Growing up, I spent a lot of time with my grandparents, mostly because both of my parents worked long shifts and long hours. It wasn't uncommon that I would even spend the night at theirs during the school week, since my middle school was just a few blocks away and I could walk there in about 15 minutes. As most kids, I was raised with two core, if not conflicting, principles. One, respect your elders, and two, do not talk to strangers. My grandparents' house is also in an area that's about a 5-minute walk to the local Walgreens, I'd say, and about the same to a small shopping centre, and this is important for the story. Anyways, so my grandma was a diabetic and had broken a hip at some point, so she couldn't really walk long distances. Given that my grandpa liked spending his days out on the streets, and my grandma knowing that I could be trusted to walk from school to home, she would occasionally give me money and send me on errands, either to Walgreens or the small 99-cent store in the shopping centre. It was during one of these errands that I was actually almost kidnapped. At least, I think I was. So my grandma had given me a few dollars and had asked me to go to the dollar store since we had run out of her almond cookies and they were the only really sweet thing that she could eat. To be honest, I didn't mind since I was just watching TV and eating anyway. It was around 4:30, so I made the quick walk to the store, bought my items and was headed back home around 4:45 or 5 o'clock. The streets on the corner heading home from the shopping outlet form an X, with the exit out onto the streets being right next to the crosswalk. As I was standing there just waiting for the light to change, I noticed a truck pull up to the exit, idle before hearing the engine turn off, and I watched as an older man, nearing his late 40s I'd say, exited the driver's side and approached me at the corner. At first, I thought that he was going to need directions, as it had happened to me before, but he just kind of stood there, watching me. I was feeling a bit unnerved now and asked if I could help him with something. He started asking me a million questions, like where I went to school, what I was doing, where I was going. I distinctly remember this next part because his statements just made no sense. He asked why I was ditching school at nearly 5 p.m. Middle school's here, let out at 3:30, mind you, which I stated, and he started calling me a liar and getting closer to me. He became really angry at this point and said that boys shouldn't lie and that I had to come with him so that he could take me back to school. I remember being really scared because the lights wouldn't change and he was being really loud, but I didn't want to break the law by crossing on a red light. He reached out to grab me and thankfully the walk sign finally came on, so I just ran as fast as I could across the street. I remember him yelling at me, asking where I was going and why I wouldn't go with him if I had done nothing wrong, to which I replied, because I just don't want to. I ran all the way back home that day, making sure to cut through the alley and going through the back door just in case he followed me. My grandma was sitting in the same spot that I had left her and didn't even notice me coming through the back, so I just gave her cookies and sat back down to watch TV. I remember being really afraid to tell her, so I didn't, and I didn't tell my mum when she picked me up either. I don't know if it was an actual kidnap attempt, but something strange was going on with that guy, and all I can put it down to is that he wanted me to get in that truck and he was going to take me somewhere. That's for sure. I was out for a drive this evening through some back roads outside of my small open town around 10:30 or 11 p.m. I'd say. I've driven these roads dozens of times before and never had an issue. Until tonight, that is. Just as a preface too, there are little to no houses along these specific roads and there's never traffic, so it's really isolated. So I'm cruising around the twisty roads, just enjoying myself and kind of in my zone when I come over the crest of a right turn that goes up a hill, which then sweeps down into a flat left turn, which has a guardrail along the right side of the road. As I crest the hill, I was going fairly slow too, at 40 or 50, as there are often deer and opossums in the area. I notice a moving figure along the guardrail. I begin to slow down more, as I figure it's a deer and I don't want to hit it. But as I get closer, I realize that it's not a deer. It actually looks like a man. At this point, I'm barely moving, just kind of creeping forward as to get closer to it, and I realize that it is a man who's crouched down in a sort of Slav squat, and he's now turned around to look at me. In my headlights, the first things I notice are he's not wearing any clothes, save for a pair of tidy whities or some sort of adult diaper or something. His eyes are oddly large too for an adult man, and just completely brown or black, and his skin is just ghostly white. As I approach, I turn my brights on, and he didn't even flinch. By now, I've completely stopped and started to reach down to get my phone, as I wanted to actually take a video. But this was a huge mistake. I looked away for a split second to just grab my phone from the passenger seat, and as I'm starting to look down, he starts sprinting right at me, and he's running directly towards me. He gets up to my window and just starts screaming like a banshee, and not just like a man yelling, but like all the rage he's ever felt is coming out at that one moment, and it's directed at me. He starts pounding on the window with his fists, all the while screaming his head off. This lasts for about 3 seconds, I'd say, before I just throw it into first gear and peel out of there as quickly as I can. As I'm accelerating, the first gear in my car takes me to about 40 miles per hour, I'd say. I look at my rear view and realize that somehow he's keeping up with me. It's not until I get in second and then third and take it up to around 80 that I can no longer see him. He was just running at inhuman speeds, trying to keep up with me, and I have no idea how he was doing it. I flew the rest of the way home, afraid to stop or look in my mirrors, and I got into the driveway and just ran inside and decided to share this. I have no idea what I encountered tonight or how that guy was keeping up with me, but I hated every second of it. All I know is that I'll be finding other routes to take when I take my nighttime drives in the future, just to be sure that I never see that guy again. So, first for a little backstory. I've worked on and off at a psych hospital for the past 9 years, I'd say. It used to be a regular hospital too, but eventually it was bought out and turned into a standalone psych facility. For the most part, I've worked overnights in the children's unit, which used to be the maternity ward when it was the old hospital. The main part of the unit is a hallway with a nurse's station, bedrooms, a day room, and a quiet room too. The quiet room is just a small empty room that can be used as a timeout for the kids or locked seclusion if necessary. Overall, it was a pretty cake job. I would get to work 15 minutes early and just finish everything I needed to do for the night as fast as possible, and then just post up in a big comfy chair at the end of the hallway and read a book or watch Netflix on my phone until it was time to wake all the kids up. In my 9 years there, I've had a lot of creepy and paranormal experiences, but the ones I'm about to share today are the ones I've always considered to be real, because it wasn't me that experienced them, but the patients on our units. So, one night between 3 and 4 a.m., a very young patient came out of his room because he was having trouble sleeping in his room. We let him take his pillows and blankets and set up a mat on the floor of the quiet room so that he could lay down in there. He stayed in there for almost an hour, I'd say, and then brought his pillows and blankets near me and sat down. Since patients aren't supposed to just chill in the hallway and all that, I told him that he needed to go back to the quiet room, and he listened. A few minutes later, he came back out, and this time the nurse came out of the nurse's station and told him that he needed to go back into the quiet room or go back into his bedroom. The patient went back into the quiet room, and a few minutes later, he came out again and sat down by me. I didn't really care if this kid was out on the hallway or not, to be honest, but I know the nurse did, so I told him that he better get into the quiet room and go to sleep, otherwise he'd just end up getting himself in trouble. When I said this, though, the kid just started crying his eyes out and said, "I can't." When I asked him why, he said that because there was a man in the quiet room just staring at him. At this point, I was just like, okay, whatever, just stay out here, and didn't think too much of it, to be honest. But fast forward about 6 months later, we had a patient on our unit that was a lot more mature than most patients that we ever had. He really should have been on a teenager unit, but he was just shy of the age limit, so he was stuck on a unit with little kids, half his age and half his size, mind you. Anyway, he would wake up around the same time every night, between 3 and 4 a.m, and not be able to fall back to sleep. So he would stand in his doorway and just talk to me, and I would never really give him any issue about this because he was pretty chill, and it gave me a break from just staring at my book on my phone. One night, though, in the middle of our conversation, he abruptly stopped and asked, "Who's standing in the quiet room?" And when I said no one, his face just went pale. I asked what was wrong, and he told me that he swore that he saw a man just staring at him from the quiet room door. And when he looked back after asking me who it was, the man was just gone. I told him the story about the little kid who told me that he saw a man staring at him in the quiet room, and we both had a good chill down our spines, and the kid said screw this and just went back into his room. So, fast forward again about a year or two now, and we have this little girl in our unit who was just non-stop chaos. Very, very tiny, and couldn't speak a single word that made sense, just garbled sounds. Always trying to bite us and scratch us, and seemingly never slept too. Everyone would say that she was possessed. She definitely wasn't, mind you, but anyway, one night after being bitten and scratched for hours straight, she was finally ordered into locked seclusion in the quiet room. It was about 15-20 minutes, I'd say, before she just started screaming bloody murder and pounding her hands on the door, to the point where her hands actually started bleeding. We let her out of the quiet room immediately, and as soon as we unlocked the door, she burst through it, pointing at the room, screaming, the boy, just over and over again. It certainly put a scare in me, as it made me remember the other 2 patients who said that they saw someone in the quiet room. After everything was calmed down, I grabbed some rags and disinfectant spray to go clean the door off after the kid pounding on it to the point of blood, and I felt just really uneasy going into that room after a kid screaming the boy, just beating their fists bloody to get out of there too. So when I opened the door back up, I slowly stuck my head inside to look around, expecting to see a ghost or something. But the room was just completely empty. But right after I pulled my head out of the room and opened the door up wider so that I could get inside, the light inside the room, it went out. Well, I noped out of there and I let someone else clean that shit room. Anyway, I always thought that this was an interesting one because, well, 3 separate patients saw someone in our quiet room, and I may have experienced something paranormal myself, in fact. I have lots of creepy stories from this hospital and my own life too that I wouldn't mind sharing in the future if anyone would be interested in hearing them. But let me know in the comments section below. I lived in 3 different houses in Kuwaita in different parts of the town as a little girl, and experienced hauntings and supernatural encounters just everywhere I went. My very first memories, in fact, are in that town, and some of them, they still scare me. But there's just a lot of history and a lot of old buildings and homes in Kuwaita. But the first house I lived in was right across from some woods too. My 3 siblings and I used to play there all the time, and one day we decided to go in further than we ever had. I was about 4 years old at the time, and we found an old dilapidated shack. As we got closer to it, the leaves to my left flew up, almost in like a straight line, like they would for a sudden gust of wind or something. but there was definitely no wind there. It stopped right in front of me, and then there was a really loud and deep man's voice all around us that screamed to get out. Needless to say, we just ran like hell. I was the youngest and smallest, and the first one out of there too. And after this, I would always see this old man at the edge of the woods. He would stay there like he was guarding them or something. But my mother asked me one day why I was so afraid of the woods, and I told her because of the bad man. She inquired further, and I told her that there was a bad man that didn't want us in the woods anymore. She brushed it off, and life just kind of went on from that point. So we moved away for a couple of years until my parents divorced. My mother moved us into a small 2-bedroom house that was close to our schools, and she was sleeping on a fold-out couch, and us kids had the 2 bedrooms. It was also right next to a cemetery too, and we would play there sometimes, as curious children often do. There was always this man there too, probably in his early 30s, that would visit his mother's grave every single day, in fact. And he was there every single time that we went, no matter what time it was. He'd pack food and even camp out there, talking away on his grave all day. We were intrigued, I must admit. We would hide behind gravestones and try to hear what he was saying. I don't remember ever being able to make anything out, but his facial expressions and body movements were so casual that it was like there was someone sitting in front of him just keeping up the banter. But one day, my oldest brother and I managed to get really close. We thought that we were so slick, and all of a sudden the man just stood up, turned around, looked right at us and said, "What are you looking at, kid?" And then just started speaking in a different voice, in a language that we sure didn't understand. It sounded like well thought out gibberish or something, if that makes sense. It's possible that he was just messing with us, but man, it was certainly creepy. And after that, I just stopped going into that area. After a short time though, we ended up moving into downtown Coeta. It was literally one street with small buildings neatly aligned on either side. We lived on the side of the street that was once a cemetery back when the town was first settled in the 1840s. But when they decided to build houses, they moved all of the graves. Well, I found out through my lack of supervision and constant curiousness that they built houses on top of graves eventually. There were gravestones and crawl spaces of at least 3 of the homes there. There was a very old white 2-storied house that sat a block from our house too, and we saw multiple families move in and out only a few months later. The house was empty most of the time, and my oldest brother, myself, and my cat climbed into the crawl space one day. We attempted to turn a stone over so that we could try to read it with our flashlight, and as we did, something hissed at us. And this was not a normal animal sound, nothing like it. It was like 100 voices all just hissing at once in different frequencies. The hair all over my body just stood up on end, and we freaked out, and my brother was the first out, and my cat was second, and then me. As I got to the sidewalk, I saw my cat get picked up and thrown too. Someone grabbed my hair and pulled me to the ground, and I was so scared that I just started crying. My cat hid in my mum's closet and wouldn't come out until the next day, and I ended up having a giant bruise on my right butt cheek. After that, it was hard for me to even walk past that house because, well, I still can't explain what happened there. In this same house, with the graves in the crawl space, I would often see an old woman too. I wasn't the only one who saw her too, but I did more than the others, and I mostly saw her at night, but sometimes in the day as well. And at night, I would often wake up to, I swear, see her standing by my dresser, which was just in front of the door. She was illuminated by the hall light my mum would leave on for us, and she would just stare at us and move her mouth, but I couldn't hear anything that she was saying. And on 3 or 4 occasions, she actually put her hand on my crayons that were on my dresser, and the next day, they were just all moldy and dried up. I have no idea why she did that, but She did, and my mum just kept replacing them and still never believed me. Also, the stuff would just turn on by itself all the time, and there were the typical footsteps and whispers, doorknobs rattling, all that stuff. And to be quite honest, it was a pretty terrifying childhood in Coweta, Oklahoma. So I'm a junior in college, and whenever I think about this incident or tell the story, it just still makes me shake, kind of, and it felt like it happened yesterday. So, a little bit of background first. I know it's hard for some people to believe this, but I grew up in a haunted house. There was an incident where a bucket flew across the room and almost hit me in the 8th grade. Something rubbed my leg while I was doing my hair in the bathroom once, roughly 9th or 10th grade, and just different stuff like that would happen. On top of all of this too, I've also seen these, like, shadow people, and some friends even have too. And emotionally, well, dang man, the environment was just absolutely toxic. Just dark, and I don't know how else to explain it, but it was just evil. And while I had experienced different things growing up, when I got to early high school, things just really escalated, and by the time that this story happens, it was the beginning of my senior year, and it was the worst of it. So, when I was a senior in high school, I mainly binged shows and just did homework. I didn't do a whole lot outside of this, mainly because I didn't have my license or a car or anything, and my life basically just consisted of TV, homework, being a small group leader on Wednesdays for a youth group, and a leader for kids ministry on Sundays and whatnot. And that was just pretty much honestly it. I have a big family, and at this point, my 3 older siblings moved out, so it was just me, my twin, and my parents. I was used to always having someone in the house, but unfortunately, not at this point. We lived out in the country of northwestern Pennsylvania. My twin sister let me know that she had to leave for school early so that she can drive and cover a shift for work and all that. My dad worked about an hour away from our house, so he would not get back home until around 7, maybe later sometimes, and my mum was just out of town. So I get off the school bus at around 3 p.m. and I immediately go upstairs to my room to continue binging House. Around 4 p.m, I notice a noise coming from below in my parents' bedroom. I quickly wrote this off as our cats though. However, the noise persisted and started getting louder too. So, around 4:30, I sat up in bed and listened, and it sounded like someone was throwing things and breaking things and tearing through things downstairs. Honestly, I just sat there kind of startled, in fear, and I didn't move. And for the next half an hour, I just listened, and man, it got real loud at one point. So, I got off my bed and quietly rested my feet on the tile flooring, and I could even feel it. I could feel vibrations coming from underneath my feet. The noise was that loud. Now, you may be thinking, why didn't you just call someone? Well, I didn't get a cell phone until a few months after this, and at this point, we no longer had a landline either. And so, I stood still for the next half an hour, and I just didn't know what to do. At this point, it was around 5:30ish, and I was just bawling my eyes out because I was so scared. And the noise is just so loud that it's beginning to hurt my ears too. But then, the noise just suddenly stopped. Just out of nowhere, it just stopped. And for some reason, this scared me more because whatever was down there had nowhere to go but up the stairs to me. And I had no way to defend myself, and at this point, I thought it could have been an intruder or something. But I literally found a dinner plate and a wooden drumstick for my drum set, and it was in my room, so I was just holding these in my hand, just waiting for something to happen. And I was shaking so bad that I almost dropped everything. I was listening and just waiting there, just trying to hear something, and I swear that I heard someone creeping up the stairs. I heard the step creak, and I threw the plate in the hallway, and one of my cats walked into the room, and now I know the creeping up the stairs couldn't have been her either. All of our cats run up and down the stairs anyway, and you could hear the difference, but then there was just nothing. Nothing happened. I stood there shaking and just crying for the next half hour, not knowing what the hell to do, and then I heard the front door around 6, and my twin announced she was home. I ran downstairs crying, and she was so confused, and I tried to tell her, but I was so worked up and crying so much that I couldn't explain it well enough. I said, "Look with me, please," and we walked across the living room to the entrance of my parents' bedroom, and I turned the light on, and to my surprise, absolutely everything was in place. To this day, I'm really anxious about being home by myself, and I'm so glad that I don't live in that place anymore. After the bank took our house, we all just kind of parted our ways for college, and then my parents divorced too. It was actually a good thing, and they're kind of best friends now. And to be honest, I'm not sure if I should warn the new owners about the house, or if I should just be done with it all. So, I was out in the country lands of Texas on this remote trail, mountain biking. It was an area I liked to ride when I would go into town, and while riding through, I saw an older man ahead just walking strangely, but I remember that he was looking straight up at the sky. I see him about 60 yards ahead of me, and it's a singular track, so I don't have room to go around him, so I simply stop, and he hears me brake and turns to me, now with his head level and looking at me. And what happened next made my skin crawl, and I'll never forget it. He starts talking and waving his arms, but his voice sounds nothing like he looks. It honestly sounded like a child talking, and sounded scared, but it was obviously a guy that was 50 plus years old. He keeps talking, but it's like someone is playing a recording from his body with his animations and mouth just not lining up and his voice sounding off. And well, I just turned around and booked it back to where I parked my car and left quickly. Now, I know that he could have just been a wilderness loony with a child's voice, but there were no other cars at the trail entrance, and he was a good 5 miles in without any gear or clothes that match a hiker or any sort of wilderness person at all. Plus, the sounds that he was making and the way that he was talking without things lining up was just impossible. Man, I hate remembering how he sounded in my head too. Alright, so first off, I'm 16 and I'm an atheist, and most of my life I've never believed in the paranormal. But lately, I'm kind of revisiting events in my head that happened to me a while ago, and no matter how hard I try, I just can't find a solution for this stuff. So, when I was 10, my parents and I moved into a house. I don't live there anymore, but we had to leave our apartment as soon as possible, and not long after we moved in, I experienced some just really weird shit. And the way the upstairs was set up is that as soon as you walk up the stairs, there's a bedroom, and then there's a door that leads to a smaller one. I had the larger bedroom accessible by the stairs, and it also had 2 closets. So, about a week after we moved in, I was trying to sleep, and my parents wanted me to go to bed early, but I've always had problems sleeping. Keep in mind that I was wide awake and not drifting off at all at this point. So, I don't think that this was sleep paralysis or a lucid dream or anything. I was even on my iPod and just listening and clicking buttons and all that. My cat was sitting next to me on my bed, and all of a sudden, I just hear this screaming coming from one of the closets. Like, really loud too. It stopped for about 5 seconds and then just started again. and it repeated about 10 more times and then just stopped. I could even hear the scream echo, and it sounded like a girl who was probably around my age at the time, I think. I looked in the direction of the closet, and so did my cat with his ears back, and I didn't see anything. The next day, I told my parents, and they didn't hear a thing, and my dad didn't even believe me, in fact. When my mum was alive, she experienced some weird things there as well. For example, she heard someone say a name, but it sounded like me when I was dead sleeping. Whatever it was, it didn't even say Mum, but her actual name. She woke up, but realized I wasn't the one who called her, and I just went back to sleep, and so did she. Another time, I was taking a shower, and all of a sudden, I heard a girl's voice say hi. I almost shit myself too, and I turned the water off and ran downstairs with a towel on and made my mum come upstairs and stay in the room while I got dressed because I was just that scared to be alone. I also spent the rest of the night downstairs with her on the couch. Another time, my mum was upstairs showering and I was on the couch downstairs, and all of a sudden I heard my name get called really loudly, like in her exact voice too, so I ran upstairs after hearing it, thinking that something was wrong, and it was about 3 times that I heard it, and she was still showering and all that, and I said to her, "Is everything okay? What do you want?" She was really confused, and she told me that she never called me, though. I'd also noticed just small things misplaced, and eventually finding them somewhere else that I knew that they were not left. So yeah, that's all for now. As of right now, I live in my mum's childhood home with my dad, and I've experienced some things here too. And so did my mum and grandpa when they were alive, and that's for another time though, I guess. I just never understood what all of this was, and I don't want to believe that it was a spirit or spirits, but to be honest with you, I just can't come up with any other logical answer. Anyway, let me know what you guys think. I'd love to hear from you. Back in 2008, I was a student planning to go to university and needed some extracurricular stuff that I could put on my entry applications. As most UK students know, one of the best to have on there is the Duke of Edinburgh Award. As a part of this award, you have to embark on an orienteering expedition. It's basically a long trek through woodland and rural villages following nothing but a map and a compass and no GPS allowed. It's a teamwork experience, and you camp and just kind of overcome hurdles together and all that type of stuff. Anyway, I was out of shape at the time, and so my uncle volunteered to take me out to the middle of nowhere to get some idea of what orienteering was like. We didn't stay out overnight, like I would have to during the real thing, but we hiked maybe 10 miles through the woods and a small village in pretty abysmal weather too. But by the end of the journey, we were soaked to the bone and honestly pretty miserable. We're looking forward to just getting back to the car and heading home. But for the last part of the journey, we were on a dirt trail heading uphill with bushes and trees either side. We were marching onward in silence at this point when, all of a sudden, there was a rustling in the foliage to our left. And from behind a large bush stepped out an old man in a black suit with a red bow tie and dress shoes. He looked to be late 70s, early 80s maybe, really pale and liver spots dotting his face and a grey or white comb over. Honestly, I was instantly weirded out. I mean, who dresses like that to go into the woods, right? The instant thought seeing a guy this age out there in those clothes and at these types of weather conditions was, this guy has lost his marbles. There was something else that took me an extra moment to notice though that kind of puzzled me. The guy was bone dry, but didn't even have mud on his shoes. We stopped in our tracks and just stared at the man for a moment, who appeared to be as frozen and shocked at seeing us as we him. My uncle made the first move, taking a step towards him, asking if he was all right. The old man continued to stare for a moment, not even moving an inch, and then it became suddenly very animated. It was like he suddenly just snapped out of a trance and he started flailing his arms wildly, saying something awful had happened, that a good friend of his needed help. He began walking backwards into the woods, motioning for us to follow him, and we did. We started off at a brisk walk and then escalated to running as we struggled to keep up with the old man. After maybe a minute, he just disappeared ahead of us, but we could hear him, so we continued to follow the noise until we reached a huge slope. We stopped at the edge and looked down to see the old man just standing at the bottom, motioning us, pleading with us to follow him. I remember looking down the slope that was probably at a 40-degree angle, I'd say, and spanned for perhaps 50 feet or more, and it was slick with mud. It looked like an accident waiting to happen, to be honest, especially given that there were no shrubs or roots to hold onto or anything. I remember looking down at the old man on the other side of the slope and just kind of wondering how the heck did he cross that so quickly and so cleanly too. I mean, at that distance, it is hard to see fine detail clearly, but I swear that he still did not appear to be wet or even muddy at all. Well, me and my uncle just kind of looked at each other, and I saw that he was getting as weirded out as I was. Despite my feelings, I made a step toward the edge and was going to try and make my way down when my uncle grabbed me firmly by the arm and just pulled me back. Under his breath, he said to me, "Something's wrong here." We took a few steps back from the edge at this point, and the old man at the bottom started getting irate. He began pleading with us again to just come down the slope, telling us that he needed our help. His friend was in trouble. My uncle shouted down to the old man that we would head back to our car and call emergency services for him, that professional help would be on its way soon, that they would have all the tools to help him and all that. The old man, though, just suddenly got furious and he began jumping up and down, demanding that we come down the slope right now or there would be hell to pay. His voice had changed drastically too, and he was practically growling his words, his hands bunched up into fists, pounding his knees like an angry toddler throwing a tantrum. I've honestly never seen a grown adult fly into such a rage in my life. His eyes looked like they were on the verge of bursting out of their sockets, in fact. His skin had gone from pale to red in almost an instant. Well, we began to hurriedly make our way back the way that we had come, and his demands and threats were just getting less audible as we got closer to the trail. But once on the trail, we practically power marched the remaining quarter mile or so to the car, all the while with my uncle on his phone to the emergency services explaining to them that there was a possible mentally ill old man just wandering the trail. We were ordered to get to our car and just await the police so that we could show them where we had encountered him. About an hour later, we met 4 officers, 2 whom had dogs with them and packs of supplies like first aid and emergency blankets, etc. We led them to the exact spot and then pointed the 2 officers with the dogs in the direction that he led us through the bushes. The search lasted all weekend, but there was absolutely no trace of the old man. In fact, the officers said that the only trail that they could pick up had been mine and my uncle's. They didn't even find any footprints or anything belonging to the old man that we had encountered. Quite honestly, it's one of the weirdest and creepiest experiences that I've ever had.